Hey guys, tonight we're sailing far off the familiar map. Like, far. You're about to land on the edge of the world, where the wind doesn't whisper but punches you in the face, and where families once lived in stone cocoons carved into the skin of the earth itself. Welcome to a scattered stretch of the Outer Hebrides, off Scotland's ragged west coast. There's not much here, unless you count ancient sheep, volcanic rocks, and waves the size of small buildings. But once, somehow, entire families called this place home, and lived. Mostly. You probably won't survive this. Let's be honest. Between the starvation, the storms, the salt air that rusts your soul, and roofs that literally collapse if the ropes snap, you're not making it past the first winter. Still, let's pretend you've got what it takes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments. I want to know where and when you're listening to this story. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at dusk, or maybe it's morning. It's hard to tell. The light is soft and grey, the air damp and sticky, and the wind never quite stops. The boat that dropped you off pulls away without much ceremony, leaving you alone with your thoughts, your boots sinking slightly into turf so soaked it squishes like sponge cake. Around you, grass, rock, mist, and the low silhouettes of stone houses that look like they were drawn by children who'd only heard rumours about architecture. The island isn't big, a few miles wide maybe. No trees, those gave up centuries ago. Nothing to block the wind but your own stubbornness. The sea surrounds you on all sides, and it's not a friendly blue postcard sea. It's a bruised, dark, boiling mass of Atlantic. The waves rise and fall like breathing beasts, and when the wind really kicks up, and it will, you'll see the water leap cliffs like it's trying to swallow the land whole. You trudge up a narrow path toward the nearest house, your face prickled red by cold spray. It doesn't look like a house at first, more like a pile of stones someone gave up on halfway through. But then you see the turf roof, the smoke curling faintly from a peat fire inside, and a battered wooden door creaking slightly with each gust. This is your first brush with the black house. Low to the ground, no windows worth mentioning, and walls so thick you could mistake them for medieval fortifications. But inside, that's where survival happens. That's where the storm stays out and the people stay warm, if they're lucky. The woman who opens the door doesn't smile, but she nods you in. You duck instinctively. These doorways were not designed for flair, just to keep the wind from slicing your face off. Inside, it's dark. Your eyes need a moment. Then, peat smoke, animal musk, wool, maybe something cooking over a low flame. You blink through the haze. A central hearth glows like a dull heartbeat. Around it, life. Worn hands knitting. A boy scraping fish scales into a wooden bowl. Chickens, yes chickens, pecking in a corner like they pay rent. It's not glamorous, it's not cute, but it's working. You sit near the fire and it hits you. Outside you are nothing, just another figure bent against the elements. But in here, inside these impossibly old walls, you're something again. You're alive, and that's enough. You notice the walls now, built without mortar, stone upon stone, packed with turf and patience. Some are older than the idea of Scotland. They weren't made by engineers or drawn on blueprints. They were made by hands that understood storms better than maps, by people who knew exactly where the wind would try to sneak in and how to shove it back out. These weren't just homes. They were decisions, deliberate ones, about how to live when the world wants you gone. Quick fact check. Black houses like this one were common throughout the Hebrides well into the 20th century. Some even held out until the 1970s, when health inspectors finally got around to noticing that living next to your cow and cooking over an open fire might not be, ideal. But until then, these homes were everything. Birthplace, kitchen, tomb, sanctuary. And here's your quirky fringe fact for the night. These houses were often thatched with shipwrecks. Seriously. Driftwood and rope from unfortunate boats would wash ashore, and islanders used every scrap to fix their roofs or bind their walls tighter. One man's maritime disaster was another's home improvement plan. But not everything's agreed upon. Historians still debate just how old some of these black house foundations really are. Some say they go back a few hundred years. Others argue the layouts echo Iron Age roundhouses. suggesting a design that's more inherited than invented. It's possible these islands pass down their homes the same way they pass down songs. One generation at a time, never written down, always known. You settle in for the night. Your host hands you a blanket made of coarse wool, itchy but warm, and shows you to a raised stone slab by the far wall. That's your bed. Yes, it's just a rock covered in straw and cloth. No, there is no mattress, but it's dry, it's inside, and that puts you ahead of 1,000 years of travellers who never made it past the rocks below. As you lie there, you can hear it. The wind outside screams like a child denied candy, wailing and howling, battering the roof ropes, shaking the wooden beams, but the stones don't move, they absorb it. That's what they do. These houses weren't built to stop the storm, they were built to outlast it. And right now, so are you. The storm wakes you before light dares show itself. At first, it's just a sound, a low grumble, like the earth itself turning in its sleep. Then, as the wind shoves harder against the black house walls, the full voice of the Atlantic roars to life, and you realise, this isn't just weather, this is ceremony, a full-blown ritual of air and water and fury, crashing together right outside your turf roof. You sit up, eyes bleary. The hearth fire has died down to coals, but someone is already moving around in the dark. It's the old man, barefoot on cold stone, tossing more peat onto the fire, with the precision of someone who's done this every morning since before you were born. He doesn't look at you, just grunts. And somehow, that grunt says, "Welcome to the morning shift." You step outside the door into a wall of wind so intense it almost flattens you. Your hair whips around, your eyes tear up instantly, and the air feels like it's vibrating in your lungs. The sky above is a boiling mess of grey, the clouds running as fast as rivers. Rain slashes sideways in sharp little knives. You squint through the chaos and realise that the sea isn't where it's supposed to be. It's higher, somehow closer, like it's climbing the land, clawing at rocks and turf, trying to drag something down with it. And still the stone cabins stand. You'd think they'd crumble, right? The way the sea hurls itself against the cliffs, the way the wind moans like a thing that's lost its name. But no, the black houses are squat and defiant, tucked into the landscape like barnacles. Their low profiles and thick double walls, stone filled with earth, don't fight the storm. They ignore it. There's something deeply Scottish about that. The Atlantic doesn't just bring weather, it brings mood and mythology. This isn't just a storm, it's a continuation of everything that's come before. The sea here has memory. Islanders will tell you that. They say the waves are echoes of old arguments between gods and ghosts, that every storm is just the sea remembering something it lost. And this storm, this one's older than you can imagine. You're reminded as you stagger toward the edge of a headland for a better look that the Atlantic has no manners. The wind almost knocks you flat and a wave explodes against the cliff below, sending a geyser of salt water high enough to touch your face. You taste the ocean on your lips, gritty and metallic. The salt here doesn't sting. It carves. It's in the air, in the soil, in your skin after just one night. It seeps into the stones of the black houses, makes them sweat with brine. The locals don't mind. If anything, they treat it like seasoning. You duck back into the house, soaked and stunned. Inside, someone laughs softly, probably at you, and hands you a mug of something warm. It tastes like barley and smoke and maybe despair, but it burns nicely on the way down. The wind rattles the roof ropes above you, and for the first time you notice how vital they are. Long, coarse ropes run in criss-cross patterns across the thatch roof, anchoring it like a spider web. Without them, the roof would lift off like a kite. And the ropes? They're made of whatever the island could spare. Hemp, kelp fibre, even old fishing lines knotted together with desperate care. It's strange, isn't it, that people didn't just survive in this place. They thrived. Generations born and buried within yards of one another. Marriages, feasts, stories, all unfolding in the shadow of the Atlantic's tantrums, and those tantrums have shaped everything, not just the houses, but the people themselves. The language they speak, Gaelic, bends like the wind, full of soft consonants and long silences. Their traditions are rooted in weather, migration, and the kinds of stories only isolation can grow. Quick historical fact. These Hebridean islands have been inhabited since Neolithic times. Archaeological digs have uncovered dwellings from around 3000 BCE, with circular stone foundations that whisper into the present. The designs aren't so different from the black houses, because once something works against the sea, you don't mess with it. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Islanders used to tether their children with rope during storms, not a joke. When the gales got especially fierce, they'd tie the little ones to stone posts or keep them leashed inside the house like dogs. It was safer than having a toddler get blown straight into the sea while chasing a chicken. Brutal, sure, but effective. And while we're on the edge of weird, let's touch on a scholarly debate that still stirs among anthropologists. Did these remote island communities intentionally resist modernisation, or were they simply overlooked? Some argue that isolation was chosen, fiercely protected. Others claim the outside world just didn't care enough to reach these far-flung rocks until it was too late. Either way, the result was a preserved way of life that by the time it faded felt like it belonged to another era entirely. The storm doesn't let up. Not for hours, maybe not even for days, but the black house holds, and so do you. The wind screams, but the thick stone doesn't answer. It just is. You start to notice things that would have been lost in a modern house. The way the roof hisses when rain hits it, the smell of wet turf, the slow drip, drip, drip from the eaves that collects in a battered iron pot. Nothing is wasted here. Every drop, every scrap, every breath of warmth counts. You sit near the hearth again, your hands drying out by the glow. A young girl sits beside you and hums a tune that loops back on itself like a sea shanty trapped in a bottle. You hum along, badly. She doesn't care. No one here cares if you're off-key, just that you're warm and fed and still breathing. The storm keeps trying, but it doesn't win. Not tonight. By the next morning, the wind has calmed into something you could almost call polite. Not quiet, let's not get crazy, but more like a firm breeze than a howling banshee. The sky is still heavy and grey, with streaks of lighter cloud that suggest the sun hasn't completely given up on this place. You step outside again, this time prepared, layered in wool that smells faintly of wet sheep and wood smoke. The landscape hasn't changed, still rocks, still grass, still sea, but now you can see the details that were hidden beneath yesterday's fury. It's in the patterns of the earth, really. Footpaths worn smooth by boots and hooves, low stone walls tracing property lines that no longer matter, and black houses nestled into the folds of the land like sleeping animals. They don't shout for attention. They blend, each one slightly different, each one built by hand, passed down or rebuilt, stone by patient stone. You're invited to help repair a wall today. It's not glamorous work, but then nothing here is. The family's sheep got out during the storm, and though most wandered back with a sort of bored defiance, one or two are still missing, probably sulking behind a crag somewhere. The wall needs patching before the next storm figures out it can punch a hole through it again. You're handed a stone. No, not that one. The right one. It's a weirdly intimate process, choosing which stone fits where. The older man guiding you doesn't speak much, just points and mutters, but when you find the right rock, one that slots into the gap with a satisfying thunk, he gives a quiet grunt of approval. High praise out here. You start to realise how clever the construction really is. These walls weren't mortared together with cement or some fancy binder. They rely on balance, weight, and knowledge passed down like family recipes. Double-skinned, with rubble packed in the middle. Flexible in a way, meant to shift a little with the wind rather than resist it outright. It's not about brute strength. It's about partnership with the landscape, letting the island teach you how not to die. Back in the house, you ask when it was built. The mother shrugs. Some of it's new, she says. Some of it's my grandfather's. And some of it, well, before names. And that's as close to a timeline as you're going to get. Historical fact for this bit. Traditional Hebridean black houses were built with locally sourced stone and turf, with construction methods that date back centuries. Some archaeologists believe the building techniques share roots with Neolithic longhouses, suggesting a continuous architectural lineage stretching across millennia. When something works against the Atlantic, you don't reinvent the wheel, you just reinforce it. Here's your fringe fact. Some black houses were constructed to be deliberately leaky. No, really. They had slight ventilation gaps in the roof and around doorways, not because the builders were lazy, but because it helped funnel out the peat smoke. Otherwise you'd choke to death before finishing breakfast. It also discouraged mould, which is always lurking in places this wet. That doesn't mean these homes were cosy in the way we'd think of it now. Warm, yes, but not in a fluffy blanket and hot chocolate sort of way. More like, the damp isn't actively trying to kill you today, so that's a win. As for the scholarly debate tonight, it's a juicy one. Some researchers argue that the very idea of community was embedded into the architecture. Black houses were often built in clusters, with shared outer walls or adjoining roof lines. Privacy wasn't really a thing. Families lived in close quarters, often with livestock just a thin partition away. The question is, did they choose that intimacy out of necessity? Or was it a conscious cultural value? Was togetherness the strategy, or the only option? Scholars still argue over whether this closeness was an embrace or a trap. Back at the wall, you pause to wipe sweat from your forehead with a sleeve that's already damp. A toddler waddles by with a chicken in tow, like they're best friends or co-conspirators. An older woman leans on a wooden staff, watching the horizon with eyes that look older than the sea. The repaired section of wall holds. Not pretty, but functional. A scar with purpose. You wander a bit in the afternoon, invited by one of the teenage sons to see the old Black House ruins down by the bluff. His voice cracks as he tells you stories of a great-grandmother who once sheltered 5 orphaned children during the hard winter, of a storm that took half the cattle but not a single person. The roof's gone now, and moss climbs the stones like a slow green fire. Inside, the hearth is still visible, just a black smudge against the back wall. And there it is, that feeling creeping in. These aren't just houses, they're fossils of human stubbornness. Memory turned to stone. They don't have plaques or velvet ropes, just the wind and the occasional sheep, and the stories carried on in someone's voice. You return to the family's black house as twilight deepens. The roof creaks, the ropes above you swaying slightly as gusts dance across the thatch. The fire crackles to life again, casting orange shadows that make the walls ripple. Dinner is simple. Fish, oats, maybe something pickled. You choose not to identify, but filling. No one talks much. There's nothing to prove here. You belong as much as anyone who stays still long enough to be trusted. That night, you lie on your straw mat, eyes tracing the flicker of firelight on the stone ceiling. You can hear the sea again, not angry this time, just breathing, like it's resting between fits. You're struck by how many generations must have done this same thing, staring up, wondering if the roof would hold, hoping tomorrow brings fewer holes to patch. Here, comfort isn't a blanket, it's a roof that stays on, a wall that holds, a fire that doesn't go out, and in a strange way, that's enough. You wake up coughing. Not because you're sick, at least not yet, but because the air inside the black house is more smoke than oxygen. The peat fire has been burning low through the night, and with no chimney, because who needs those when the whole roof breathes, the smoke has decided to gather low and cosy just above your head. It clings to your clothes, your hair, the back of your throat. You sit up, hacking softly into your sleeve and glance across the room. No one else seems to notice. The family moves around the haze like it's just another room in the house. Someone cracks open the low wooden door, letting in a sliver of grey morning light and a whoosh of clean air, icy and sharp. The smoke lazily swirls upward and out, temporarily tamed. You shuffle over to the hearth, where the peat bricks are smouldering quietly. You try not to gag on the smell. It's not unpleasant exactly, more earthy than anything else, but it seeps into your soul. Think campfire mixed with wet moss, with a sharp aftertaste of historical necessity. Peat, the old man says, handing you a fresh slice. From the bog. Cut it myself last summer. You hold the lump of compacted turf and realise this thing, this crumbly, blackened chunk of old earth, is keeping everyone alive. And it's been doing that for generations. Out here, where there are no forests to chop down and no coal to dig up, peat is life. And death too, if you let the fire go out. That's today's job, you're told, tending the fire. A task usually reserved for someone trusted, someone who won't forget and let the hearth go cold, but they give it to you, maybe because they're testing you, or maybe because they think you're useless at the wall building part. Either way, you take your post on the 3-legged stool like a throne, armed with a stick for stirring, and an understanding that you now control the heartbeat of the house. Quick history check. Peat bogs across Scotland have been cut and dried for centuries. It's slow burning, easy to transport, and stores well over the winter. But harvesting it was brutal. Back-breaking work with a slane, a special spade, done knee-deep in soaked ground while midges swarmed your every pore. You didn't just collect peat, you earned it. Then it was stacked in careful pyramids to dry, sometimes for weeks. Losing a winter's worth of peat to rain or mould was no small thing. It meant freezing, cooking less, or choosing between warmth and food. But here's your weird fact of the night. Peat bogs don't just hold fuel, they preserve everything. In parts of Scotland, archaeologists have pulled out shoes, tools, even human bodies from bogs, intact, thanks to the anaerobic conditions. A whole Iron Age man, hair still on his skull, once surfaced in a peat bog like he just nodded off for a nap. People used to joke, kind of, that if you misplaced something and couldn't find it, you'd better go check the bog. Who knows? Might be next to an ancestor. There's still debate among environmental historians today about peat's long-term cost. On one hand, it sustained countless lives in places where no other fuel was available. On the other, it's now understood that peatlands store massive amounts of carbon. Stripping them bare for fuel may have helped local families survive, but at a cost we're only now starting to grasp. Ecologically, culturally, even spiritually. Should they have found another way, or was peat the only card they had to play? You stir the fire as these thoughts flicker through your smoke-addled mind. A child walks by and drops a fishbone into the flames, like an offering. The smoke curls up with a strange new smell, and no one reacts. You wonder how many meals this hearth has witnessed, how many nights it's pushed back the cold, and you suddenly get why every home you've seen on this island has its hearth dead centre. It isn't just for heat, it's the core, the literal and emotional heart of the home. If it goes cold, everything else does too. Someone hands you a bowl of hot porridge, thick and salted, with a layer of what you hope is cream skimming the top. It's served without ceremony, eaten without conversation. The family gathers around the fire as they do every morning, faces lit from below like a camp of conspirators. They don't say much, not because they're unfriendly, but because there's no need. Everything important is already known. By midday the room has cleared a little. The smoke thins as the fire catches properly. Light filters in through the single window, a fist-sized hole plugged with oiled sheepskin that diffuses the light into a kind of dim golden wash. You sit in silence, listening to the wind pick up again. The ropes overhead creak like an old ship. The roof is working just as hard as the fire. Then someone says it. Another storm's coming. It's not panic, just information. Like announcing supper is ready or someone saw a seal near the cove. You glance toward the doorway, wondering if this one will be worse than the last. Your host shrugs. They come when they like, he says. We don't ask questions. It's a sentence that sticks with you. This place, this island, this house, this family, doesn't fight the world. They endure it. They bend like rope, like smoke, like old turf stacked with care. There's a quiet dignity in that, a kind of resilience that doesn't advertise itself. It just survives. That night, as the wind begins to gather again, you sit by the fire like it's your job. You stoke the peat. You stir the embers. The room is dim and smoky and oddly warm. You can hear the sea grumbling again, preparing its voice for another tantrum. But inside this house the heartbeat continues. Thick walls, thick air, thick silences. You think about how many people have sat here, right here, doing what you're doing, watching the flames, listening for leaks in the roof, and despite the smoke in your eyes and the ache in your back, something about it feels safe, or at least safer than the storm outside. The next day arrives with a sky the colour of pewter, and an air so wet it feels like you're walking through breath. Not rain exactly, just a constant floating mist that coats your skin and makes your clothes feel heavier than they should. Your boots squish with every step, and you're pretty sure your socks are more sponge than fabric at this point. You walk the narrow path that winds through the grass like a thread through wool, trailing your fingers along a low stone wall that still radiates the night's chill. You lean your weight against one of the black house walls and close your eyes. The stone feels alive somehow, cool, dense, with little flecks of sea salt gritted into its surface like it's been sneezed on by the ocean for 1,000 years. These walls don't just keep out the cold, they hold in everything. Heat, smoke, memories. You can feel it in the way they sweat during a storm, weep quietly after the fire dies, and hum faintly when the wind wraps around them. Built thick, sometimes over 3 feet wide, they're made of 2 outer layers of dry stacked stone, filled in the middle with rubble, turf, and whatever else could be scrounged. Nothing wasted. The stones are never uniform. They bulge and twist, their lichen-dotted faces angled in every direction, fitted not for beauty but balance. This is a wall that has no straight lines and no apologies. It's not here to impress you, it's here to outlive you. You ask an older woman who's scrubbing a fish near the door how they chose their stones. She wipes her hands on her apron and gives you a look that suggests the question is either too simple or too complicated. "We use what fits," she finally says. Then she turns back to the fish, slicing it open with the precision of someone who's done this 6,000 times. And that's how this place works. Nothing is built according to grand plans. It's all improvisation and memory. Every curve in a wall, every weirdly angled beam in the roof, every uneven flagstone on the floor, it all comes from trial, error, and inherited stubbornness. Here's your historical fact for today. These stone walls didn't just evolve for structural strength, they also served as insulation. In places where winter arrives early and overstays its welcome, and where heating fuel is a precious commodity, wall thickness meant the difference between frostbite and survival. The thermal mass of all that stone held heat long after the fire had gone out, slowly releasing it into the house like the world's oldest radiator. You pause and press your ear to the wall, half as a joke, half out of curiosity. All you hear is a soft, deep thrum. Maybe the wind, maybe your own heartbeat. But there's something comforting about it, like the house itself is breathing. Now for a slightly more offbeat detail. In some older black houses, seashells were sometimes embedded in the mortar, not for decoration, but as a form of primitive insulation or bonding material. Some locals believed the crushed shells also brought luck, tying the homes spiritually to the sea that both sustained and threatened them. So next time you see a wall glitter faintly in the sun, you might be looking at a shrine to survival, one crushed muscle at a time. As you walk along the outer curve of another house, you notice the placement of windows, or rather, the lack of them. A small slit, maybe 2 or 3 inches across, barely wide enough for a cat to squeeze through, lets in the faintest trace of daylight. You duck inside and find that these weren't so much for seeing out as for letting the light gently bleed in. Too many windows meant too many places for wind to punch its way through. Here the dark was safer than the draught. And that's a point of scholarly debate still rattling around. Did the darkness of black houses foster a particular kind of communal life? Did it make people draw closer, focus inward, live more by feel than by sight? Some historians argue that the architecture shaped the social structure. Close-knit, orally centred, deeply ritualistic. Others say it was just necessity. Who needs ambience when you're just trying not to die of exposure? You trail your fingers along the wall as you walk inside, tracing grooves that look like they've been worn smooth by generations of the same movement. You imagine a mother leaning here to nurse a baby, a boy pressing his face to the slit window, waiting for his father's boat to come back, a daughter touching the stone before stepping out into marriage or war or emigration. The wall has seen them all, and it remembers. Later a storm cloud tears briefly open overhead, letting through a shaft of pale gold light. For about 3 minutes the whole island glows. The sea turns molten silver. The grass becomes a living emerald carpet. The stones of the black houses shimmer as if sweating fire. And then, just like that, it's gone, swallowed again by fog and wind and the hush that follows drama. You find yourself watching the walls more than the people now. You notice how some tilt slightly, bowing to time, and how the turf that binds their tops is alive with tiny white flowers. Moss grows between the stones like green mortar, patching what people can't reach. Even decay here is purposeful. No wall is abandoned, it just retires. A man walks by and casually points out the house his grandfather built, still standing. He gestures to a corner that's clearly collapsed and shrugs. "A storm got it," he says, as if he's talking about a lost sock. "We'll fix it next summer." There's no rush. Nothing ever really ends here. It just pauses until someone has the time and energy to repair it. You end the day by leaning once more against a black house wall, the stone now warm from a full day of trapping heat inside. You sit in silence, letting the wind curl around the curve of the house, while the Atlantic murmurs in the distance. The walls don't whisper. They listen. And in that stillness you start to understand why people didn't just build these homes. They trusted them. By now, you've stopped thinking of the black house roof as something separate from the wind. It's more like a negotiated truce. You watch it heave slightly during the next gale, like an old lung rising and falling, never quite still. Ropes snake across the thatch in tight weathered loops, tied down at regular intervals like the roof is strapped to the earth for its own safety. You'd never realised how tense a roof could look until now. It doesn't sit, it clings. Today you're helping retie some of those ropes before the next proper storm rolls in. It's a full-body task. You stand on a crude wooden ladder that wobbles with every gust, and below you, the matriarch of the house holds the base steady, giving you occasional shouted advice that sounds more like insults. She's not unkind, just incredibly efficient with her words. You reach up to pull one of the long ropes tighter, gritting your teeth as your fingers fumble with the damp knots. They're harder than they look, crusted with salt and age, made from fibre twisted so tightly it feels like it might bite you. You pause to study the roof itself, bundles of reeds layered in thick mats, tied down with netting and pegged at the edges with heavy stones. This isn't a decorative touch. These roofs are war gear. They have to be, because the Atlantic doesn't tap politely on your door. It tries to rip the whole thing off and throw it into next week. Historical fact time. Traditional black house roofs were often thatched with heather, straw, marram grass, or reeds, depending on what grew nearby. The ropes, often made of hemp, kelp, or even animal sinew in earlier times, kept the thatch down in all weather. These were anchored to stones placed either inside or around the outer wall, sometimes weighted with boulders like the house was trying to avoid being picked up and thrown like a child's toy. You hear this wind, and you don't doubt for a second why those boulders are necessary. The woman below you tells a quick story, without even looking up, about how her cousin's roof blew clean off in '62. Flew into the sea like a sail, she says, and took half the bedding with it. You nod solemnly, not entirely sure if you're supposed to laugh, then nearly lose your footing when a stronger gust shoves your ladder. She doesn't flinch. She just tightens her grip and says, "Hold on." Quirky fringe fact incoming. Some households in the Hebrides used woven fishing nets as part of their roof lashings. After all, if you can't fish in a storm, your net might as well be keeping your roof on. There are stories of people stripping down their gear midwinter and running it up over the house, just to hold things in place. In some cases, villagers would help each other lash down entire rows of black houses, as if they were tying up boats for the season. This leads us to one of the quieter scholarly arguments around these structures. Were these roof techniques learned from boat building? Some suggest that the skills passed down from maritime work, knot tying, net weaving, tension balancing, fed directly into the architectural language of the roof. Others argue it's just parallel evolution. After all, surviving the sea and surviving the wind require the same kind of grit. Back on the ladder, your fingers finally win their battle with the knot. You loop the rope down to the old anchor stone and give it a final yank. It holds. You climb down, and the matriarch gives you a rare nod of approval. You've helped the house fight another day. Inside, the family gathers to check for leaks. A bucket is placed under a familiar drip near the corner, where the thatch always sags just a little. No one panics. Someone jokes that if the bucket fills up fast enough, they'll do laundry tonight. Another just shrugs and tosses a piece of cloth into the trickle. You're amazed by the casual acceptance of what would be a full-blown emergency in most modern homes. But here, it's just the roof reminding you it's still part of the story. The ropes overhead groan with tension as the wind picks up again. The house doesn't resist, it flexes. You start to notice how every beam and knot is part of a living system. The roof isn't static, it breathes. It lifts slightly under pressure, then settles back into place. The ropes hum like a dull cello string. The netting above sways just a little, enough to catch your eye but not enough to make you worry. This is a house that has agreed, begrudgingly, to let the weather pass. As evening sets in, you lie back on your bed of straw and wool staring at the dark ceiling. You can see the ropes crisscrossing in patterns above, like scars or stitches. It's a strange kind of beauty, this blend of function and fragility. You realise, in a way, the roof is both a shield and a promise. We will stay. We will not be swept away. Someone outside shouts a warning as a stronger gust tears across the island. You hear the whoosh, the slam of wind against stone, the low creaking above. But the house stays calm. It absorbs the pressure. It's done this before. Thousands of times. Maybe more. You can't stop thinking about what it takes to live under a roof like this. Not just courage. Trust. Trust in the people who built it. In the ropes and knots. In the stones that weigh it down. You realise how exposed your life back home would feel here. How hollow drywall sounds compared to 3 feet of living stone, and a roof you helped tie down with your own hands. The storm continues into the night, but no one seems too concerned. The fire burns low, the ropes hum, the walls hold, and overhead the roof does what it's always done. It stays. The first thing you notice when you wake up isn't the fire or the sound of the wind, it's the smell. It's equal parts livestock, damp wool and smoke, laced with something warm and almost sweet. You blink awake, disoriented for a moment, and then remember where you are. The black house breathes around you low and steady, like you're resting inside the belly of some old stone beast, and you're not alone, not by a long shot. There's a snort about a foot from your head. You turn, and there it is, a cow. A full-grown, slightly curious, possibly judging cow, lying in its own little stall, separated from you by what could charitably be called a fence, but is really just a few planks wedged between stones. Beyond her, there are chickens tucked in a coop near the hearth, and at least one sheep snoring softly in the corner like it pays rent. This isn't a barn, this is your house. And the animals, they're part of the family whether you like it or not. This is your new normal, one house, many lives, and you're living among them now. There's no illusion of separation, no back porch, no shed, no special room with a mop and a bottle of bleach to keep the smells at bay. The idea of zoning, that modern trick where people and animals have neatly divided areas, doesn't exist here. People sleep in one corner, animals in another. In the middle, the fire, the food, the warmth. It's crowded, yes, but it's efficient. Everyone plays their role, and the body heat doesn't hurt either. Historical fact. The design of black houses was intentional in combining human and animal quarters under one roof. In the unforgiving climate of the Hebrides, body heat from livestock contributed to the warmth of the household. These homes were designed to keep people alive, not to impress guests or win awards for aesthetic separation. A cow that snores is still a cow that heats the room. You find yourself adjusting surprisingly fast. Sure, the cow's breath is a little ripe first thing in the morning, and stepping in chicken poop on your way to the water bucket isn't exactly how you imagined a rustic getaway. But there's something comforting about the proximity. It's a full ecosystem under one thatch. Every movement, every sound, part of a shared rhythm. The youngest child, a boy no older than 5, shows you how to feed the chickens without getting pecked. He moves with the confidence of someone twice his age, scattering grain while humming a Gaelic lullaby under his breath. You crouch beside him and ask if he ever minds living so close to the animals. He gives you a blank look, like you've asked if he minds breathing. "Why would I?" he says. "They're ours." And that's that. There's a rhythm to the day. Feed the animals, stoke the fire, fix what broke overnight. Someone's always doing something and everyone's always within arm's reach. Even meals are a shared event, not just because food is scarce, but because there's literally no space to eat alone. You sit cross-legged near the hearth again, balancing a bowl of something vaguely fishy in your lap, while the sheep coughs in the background and the cow stares into the fire like it's remembering a past life. Here's a strange but true tidbit. In some black houses, the human and animal areas weren't even separated by walls, just by raised platforms. Humans slept on box beds or straw mattresses slightly above the animals, both for warmth and to avoid the damp that settled into the floor at night. Some older designs even allowed waste from the livestock to flow out through special drainage in the stone floor. Functional, if not exactly hygienic by modern standards. And here's the open question scholars still love to chew on. Did this intimate setup breed a deeper connection between people and their animals, or just reinforce survival dependency? Were cows viewed as sacred cohabitants or just walking blankets with udders? Oral histories suggest both. Families often named their cows, spoke to them, sometimes even claimed they understood certain Gaelic words, but they also slaughtered them when needed. Affectionate pragmatism, if such a thing exists. You take a moment to sit in the doorway as dusk settles in again. From here, the house hums like a living organism. The hearth crackles, someone coughs, the cow shifts and thuds softly against the wall. Everything inside the black house feels contained, like you've pulled a bit of the world tight around you and closed it with rope. It's small, yes. Cramped, absolutely. But it's safe. And in a place like this, safe is sacred. A neighbour stops by to trade smoked fish for eggs. She ducks under the low lintel and gives the cow a pat like it's just another person in the room. Her shoes are caked in peat mud, and she smells like wind and wool and long walks over wet hills. She talks for a while about nothing in particular, whose boat is leaking, which sheep wandered where. The kind of news that only matters when your world is this tightly knit. Before she leaves, she hands you a small carved charm, a polished bit of antler etched with swirling patterns. To hang near the cow, she says, keeps her from dying in her sleep. She doesn't explain further. She doesn't have to. Out here, charms aren't questioned. They're just hung. The animals settle for the night one by one, just like the people do. You roll onto your straw bedding again and listen to the soft clatter of hooves as the cow lies down behind her wooden half wall. Someone nearby snores. Someone else mumbles in their sleep. The fire pops once sharply, and a burst of sparks floats up into the dark. Overhead, the ropes on the roof twitch with the wind. You're not alone in this house, not in any sense of the word, and somehow the closeness that once felt strange has started to feel like protection. The cow, the chickens, the family, they're part of the fortress, part of the warmth, and if the storm comes again tonight, you'll face it together. You've stopped noticing the smoke until you leave the house and return again. That's when it hits you. The rich, peaty fog that clings to every surface, to your hair, to the roof of your mouth. The black house isn't ventilated the way modern buildings are. There's no chimney, no mechanical drawer, just smoke rising into the thatch where it weaves through the grasses and rope above, slowly escaping into the sky. You duck inside after your morning stumble through the damp yard, and it's like stepping into a dream that smells like scorched moss and burned porridge. The hearth is alive again, not roaring, but low and steady, glowing like the buried heart of the island. Someone's already stoked it, stirred it, coaxed it awake. Peat bricks, black and crumbling, rest along the edge, drying for their turn in the flames. The room is hazy with smoke, especially at head height. Children scurry below it without blinking. You, on the other hand, cough like someone's hexed your lungs. Still, there's something sacred about this fire. You sit by it, stretching your hands toward its subtle heat, letting it warm your fingers as steam rises from your wet sleeves. Every part of the house depends on it. It's not just for cooking or heat, it's the lifeline, the centre of everything. It's where people gather, where gossip is shared, where prayers are mumbled under breath. The fire is home. Today you're taught how to tend it properly. Not just feed it, but listen to it. The old man, his beard like steel wool and eyes buried deep under folds of skin, watches you with the solemn authority of someone who has probably spoken to the fire longer than to his wife. He shows you how to build it in layers, dry peat, then smouldering coals, then the exact right poke with a stick to stir life into it. You're told not to rush it. The fire doesn't like rush. You have to earn its warmth. And then comes the smoke, the eternal nuisance and the accidental saviour. You ask why no one ever built chimneys into these homes. He looks at you like you've just asked why the sea is wet. The smoke keeps the roof dry, he mutters, drives out the damp, kills the mould. You blink, because of course. The smoke isn't just a byproduct, it's a tool. It preserves, it sanitizes. It's even used to smoke meat and fish, a method passed down with quiet reverence. Historical fact. In black houses, the absence of a chimney wasn't just a design flaw, it was intentional. The thick thatch of the roof was slowly impregnated with smoke and tar, making it both water-resistant and surprisingly durable. The smoke also acted as a kind of natural pesticide, keeping insects at bay. The entire internal structure, the rafters, the ropes, the turf, all benefited from this slow, steady seasoning. But there's a trade-off. You watch a woman squint through the haze as she weaves by firelight, coughing every few minutes with the dry bark of someone who's lived her whole life inside a smokehouse. Children rub their eyes often. No one mentions it. It's just part of the bargain. Warmth or breath, comfort or clarity. You can't have both. Now for your quirky detail of the night. Many Hebridean islanders believed the hearth fire should never go out. Not ever. If it did, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It was bad luck. A sign of spiritual neglect. In some homes, embers were carried from the old house to a new one in a small box, a literal transfer of domestic soul. And during seasonal festivals like Beltane or Samhain, the fire might be ritually extinguished and relit, but only in accordance with tradition. To let it die by accident was like forgetting a family member's name. Unforgivable. There's a legend passed around while you sit near the hearth, of a man who mocked the fire and fell ill that winter, never to recover. The fire listens, they say, not quite in jest. You glance at the glowing coals, wondering how much of that tale is warning and how much is memory. This brings us to a favourite academic squabble. Was the Black House hearth a sacred space or just a practical one? Anthropologists argue both sides. Some believe it served as the spiritual centre of the household, aligned with ancient rituals and seasonal cycles. Others insist it was no more than a smoky stove, but in truth, it was probably both. When you live on the edge of survival, practicality and sacredness blur. What keeps you alive becomes holy, whether you want it to or not. In the corner, a piece of fish dangles on a hook near the fire, slowly curing in the heat and smoke. No one pays it any mind. It will be ready when it's ready. Beside it, bundles of herbs hang upside down, heather, mugwort, angelica drying in the soot-stained air. They'll be used in stews, in teas, or pressed into cloth for fevers. Everything circles the fire. By nightfall, the house smells stronger than ever. Not bad exactly, just full. Full of time, of bodies, of life both gone and ongoing. You sit by the fire again, this time alone for a moment, listening to the crackle and watching shadows play on the soot-blackened stones. The roof sighs above you. The ropes creak faintly. The smoke curls toward the thatch like it knows where it's going. It occurs to you that no one has cleaned the walls. Ever. Why would they? The soot is part of the insulation now. It darkens the stone, softens the corners, adds texture to the story. You run your hand along the wall and come away smudged but strangely proud. You're part of it now. Smoked like the fish. Cured by the house. You sleep that night with your face turned toward the hearth. The fire burns low, casting the faintest glow across the beams above. Someone coughs softly. The wind rattles the door but doesn't get in. The smoke drifts upward, lazy and sure of itself. And just before you fall asleep, you whisper, because you've started to believe it too. Don't go out. You don't need a clock to know when the Atlantic's about to throw a tantrum. The signs are everywhere. A subtle drop in air pressure that makes your ears feel fuzzy. The sky turns that peculiar metallic grey, flat and unforgiving. The animals grow restless, shifting and muttering like they know something you don't. Even the house feels different. The stone walls seem to tense, the roof ropes creak with anticipation, and the fire burns lower, quieter, like it's holding its breath. A gust slams against the door hard enough to rattle the latch, and just like that, the storm announces itself. Not a polite knock, but a full-body shove, like the sea wants in and doesn't care who's standing in the way. You scramble to reinforce the wooden latch, while the older daughter calmly wedges a thick timber bar into place. She doesn't flinch, even as another gust sends a cascade of rain hissing across the roof. You're not going anywhere today. No one is. Meals are delayed, repairs postponed, plans cancelled before they were even spoken aloud. The storm now runs the schedule. You hunker down with the family in the Black House, all of you packed in like books on a crowded shelf. The hearth flickers behind you, casting long shadows that dance across faces and smoke-streaked walls. Outside, the wind is a living thing, screaming, clawing, howling. The house trembles, but it doesn't give. The walls bow slightly, the ropes strain, the roof hisses beneath the rain, but everything holds. Historical fact. The North Atlantic storms that pound the Hebrides are among the most brutal in Europe. Some gusts exceed 100 miles per hour, and waves have been recorded slamming against cliffs with the force of a freight train. In the 19th century, entire boats vanished with no warning, swallowed whole in weather so fast and furious it left no survivors, and sometimes not even a name. These weren't occasional freak events, they were routine, seasonal, predictable in the worst way. You sit in the dark, lit only by firelight and a single lantern fueled by animal fat. Around you, time stretches. There's no point looking out the window. There is no window, not really. Just that tiny sheepskin-covered slit that glows dully in the storm's fury, as if the sky itself has caught fire. You listen. The sound of the wind isn't steady. It pulses, like breath. Long inhalations, sharp exhalations. It moves around the house, probing for weakness. You swear you hear it circle back like a beast testing its prey. But inside there's a strange calm. Children play knucklebones in a corner, their laughter small but stubborn. The grandmother mutters to herself while spinning wool, lips moving in a language you don't fully understand. The parents sit shoulder to shoulder, sipping something hot from cracked mugs. Their posture relaxed, like this isn't even close to the worst they've seen. You're the only one flinching every time a gust shakes the beams above. The storm pounds louder and someone starts to sing. It's the older woman, voice rough as wool but steady. It's not a song you know, no melody you could hum, but it rises and falls with the rhythm of the wind, curling into the firelight like smoke. The others join in, one by one, not loudly, just enough to fill the space. Their voices don't fight the storm, they ride it. You realise the song is older than the house, older than the island. Something passed down the way fire is passed, carefully, reverently. Here's your fringe fact. During Atlantic storms, some island families would actually use song to measure the worst of it. There were verses specifically sung to outlast the howling. Time to see how long the wind could be drowned by voice. If the storm swallowed the song too quickly, it meant the worst was still coming. If the song held, the family could relax. Oral barometry, wrapped in tradition. There's still academic debate about how these communities coped emotionally with constant exposure to deadly weather. Some scholars argue that storytelling and ritual were not just cultural expressions, but literal survival tools, methods to maintain sanity in an environment where control was an illusion. Others push back, insisting these were just habits, not strategies. But when you hear the way this family sings while their roof shudders, you feel the argument resolve itself. This is survival. It's sung, not spoken. You press your palm to the stone wall again, not for warmth, but to feel the vibrations. You swear you can detect the rhythm of the storm itself through the stone, like the house is a drum and the sea is playing it. It's not terrifying anymore, just immense. A force of nature, yes, but no longer your enemy. More like a seasonal visitor who gets drunk and smashes all your furniture. Unwelcome, but expected. The cow moves softly in her corner, restless but calm. The chickens are quieter than usual, feathers ruffled and tucked in. Even the dog, some scruffy, half-wild creature you hadn't noticed until now, has curled near the fire with one eye open, tracking the door like it's waiting for something. The storm keeps coming, hours pass, you lose track of how many. The room grows colder despite the fire, and someone throws on a fresh slab of peat. The smoke thickens, your eyes water, but no one complains. At some point, you're handed a mug of broth and a chunk of bread that tastes like it fought the flour mill and lost. You eat it gratefully, the warmth sinking into your belly like a promise. Night falls harder than usual, a curtain of black around the storm. You can't tell what time it is, only that it's later than it should be, and earlier than it feels. The house becomes smaller, cosier, packed with the sounds of shifting bodies, the occasional murmur, the distant crash of a wave against the cliff. You wrap yourself in a wool blanket that smells faintly of sheep and salt and thyme. You look around and realise the walls have held. The roof is still above you, the fire still burns, the song, long since faded, still echoes quietly in your head. The Atlantic has not won, not tonight. By morning the storm has spent itself, not gone, just tired. You crack open the black house door and the outside world stares back, half wrecked and half beautiful. The grass lies flattened in waves, the sea still growls with distant thunder, and the sky is that bruised silver blue that comes only after something has been broken and put back together again. You step outside into a landscape reshaped by wind, the air sharp with salt and something else, stillness. It's the kind of silence that doesn't last long. Someone is already at work hauling in tangled rope that's come loose from a roof across the way. Another voice curses cheerfully in Gaelic as a bucket is upended to reveal a hen underneath, dazed but unharmed. The cow is let outside, snorting at the sudden brightness. She blinks up at the sky like it owes her an apology. The storm is over, but the inspection has only begun. You're handed a cloth to wipe the water from the hearthstones. The fire never went out, but it sputtered overnight, and the damp crept in from the floor, settling in the corners like forgotten guests. Everyone in the house starts moving with quiet precision, checking beams, testing the door latch, tightening roof ropes. The black house may have held, but now it needs reassurance. These houses weren't built to keep water out perfectly. They were built to survive being wet. And now comes the drying, the patching, the whispering to the stones. You did good. Let's get you ready for the next one. Again. You help with the ceiling, poking at the thatch with a long stick to find weak spots. Water drips into a pan with a steady plink. You count each drop, hypnotised. Somewhere behind you, a child sings under their breath. A lullaby meant not for a baby, but for the house itself. A kind of thank you. A lullaby for the roof. Here's your historical fact. The immediate aftermath of a storm in the Hebrides was often more dangerous than the storm itself. Collapsed structures, weakened turf roofs, split walls, all had to be tended with urgency. In the absence of formal engineering, maintenance became a communal ritual. Every storm was a test, and every survival was a grade. You walk outside and follow the path toward the cliffs. A chunk of stone wall has collapsed, its scattered pieces wet and steaming slightly in the morning sun. You kneel to gather the stones, one by one, as others join you. There's no discussion, no plan, just shared effort. The repair is instinctual. The shape of the wall still lives in memory, even if the stones forgot overnight. You place one back, and it fits, not perfectly, but confidently. And then you see it. Washed up in the cove below, tangled in kelp and sea foam, the bones of a small fishing boat. Not from this island, someone mutters. Too new, too smooth. It must have come from farther down the chain, or even the mainland. No one recognises it, but the mood turns briefly sombre. A boat with no name is a bad omen. You can almost feel the air stiffen, the way conversation turns into silence when someone walks in wearing grief on their shoulders. The older man spits once into the grass. "They built it wrong," he says. You're not sure if he means the boat or the day. Here's your fringe fact. When something washed up after a storm, islanders would inspect it carefully, not just for salvage, but for signs. A shoe with no foot might be kept for luck. A broken oar was sometimes wedged into a blackhouse wall to anchor it spiritually. Boats weren't just tools, they were living extensions of the people who rode them, and when one died, it was mourned like kin. As you walk back, you find your eyes drifting again to the houses. Their thick stone walls are streaked with new moisture, moss darkened, turf sodden. But they're still here. They always are. Someone's sweeping out the animal's corner with a bundle of heather. Someone else is repairing the rope netting that holds the roof down. No one's waiting for instructions. These habits are baked into the bone. The storm is just another season. Repair is just another prayer. And now, for a touch of academic tension, some argue that these repairs were acts of ritual as much as necessity. That the morning after maintenance became a kind of sacred rhythm. Walls are patched in a certain order, roofs lashed in specific patterns, water poured out from the same buckets. There are even oral traditions claiming that certain stones should never be moved, no matter what. That one, someone told a visiting researcher once, holds the old voice. Was it superstition? Was it engineering? The line here, as always, is blurry. Back inside, the hearth is crackling again. The fire's been fed fresh peat and some dry bracken to get it roaring. The air warms quickly, and the damp in your boots becomes a distant memory. You sit beside the fire and notice how the walls seem closer today, not because they've moved, but because you've shifted. You're not just visiting anymore. You're part of the breathing system that responds to the storm. The cow returns to her corner, flicking her ears like she's just endured an inconvenience, not a hurricane. The children chase each other around the low beams, ducking instinctively. Someone retells a joke you don't understand but laugh at anyway. And just like that, the day resets. There's something comforting about the normalcy that follows violence, a kind of stubborn domesticity that reasserts itself. Dishes are washed, socks are hung to dry on a string above the fire. You help peel potatoes while a chicken perches on a stool nearby, eyeing you with suspicion. There's a rhythm again. It's quieter, softer. You end the day brushing the soot off your sleeves and settling back into your bedding, eyes heavy, skin warm, hair still full of salt. Outside, the storm has left behind puddles and broken branches, seaweed on fences and the smell of iron in the air. But the house has held. The fire has endured. The roof, patched and tightened, hums softly in the wind. And somewhere on the edge of your thoughts, as sleep begins to take you, you realise something. Survival isn't dramatic. It's not loud or heroic. It's quiet, repetitive. It looks like peeling potatoes after a storm and tying ropes before the next one. That's how these families live. Not by fighting nature, but by waiting it out, patching the wall and keeping the fire alive. There's a knock at the door. Not the wind this time, but an actual fist. 3 raps, then a pause, then 2 more. You look up from where you're scraping dried lichen off the firestones and meet the eyes of the oldest son. He nods once and goes to open it. The door creaks, the wind breathes in, and in steps a neighbour with a bundle wrapped in cloth and a grin that says something rare has happened. He lifts the cloth, and the room leans forward with interest. Dried fish. Perfectly smoked, silvery, still glinting from oil and sea spray. A good catch, preserved right, and enough to trade. It's a minor miracle, really. And in this place, miracles are dried, salted, smoked, and hung from the rafters. There's a short negotiation, eggs for fish, 2 skeins of wool, and half a jar of thick oat paste flavoured with wild garlic. The entire economy here runs not on coin, but on memory and reputation. Who gives fairly? Who cuts corners? Who salted their herring too lightly last winter, and had a line of angry stomachs to answer for? You're learning quickly that food isn't just survival, it's trust. Meals are built from what doesn't rot. Freshness is a luxury. You slice into a hard, dark loaf of bread that could double as a self-defense weapon, made weeks ago and still perfectly edible, if you soak it first. Beside it sits a crock of butter, slightly off by modern standards but entirely normal here. Then there's the fish, hung and smoked over the hearth, firm to the touch and rich with the scent of peat. Every bite is an act of patience, caught, cleaned, salted, dried and waited on. Historical fact time. Food preservation was the defining feature of Hebridean island life. With few fresh supplies and irregular trade, families relied on traditional methods, salting, drying, fermenting, pickling, to make food last not just for weeks but months. Herring was king, but other fish, seabirds, mutton, and even edible seaweed were all part of the culinary routine. Anything that could be dried was dried, anything that could be smoked was smoked. The rest was buried or brined, and yes, some of it was terrible. You're handed a small wooden bowl filled with sour greyish oats, known affectionately, or not, as sowens, made from the fermented husks of oats, left to sour over days in a wooden barrel before being boiled into something technically edible. You swallow a spoonful and try not to make a face. The texture is somewhere between pudding and wallpaper paste, and the flavour, tangy. Alarmingly so. You glance at the child next to you, who's happily slurping it like it's dessert. You remind yourself, acquired taste. Fringe fact for the day, some families buried meat in peat bogs to preserve it, using the cool, acidic and low oxygen conditions to slow decay. There's a reason the bogs have preserved bodies, tools and entire cloaks for centuries. Why not a mutton haunch? It wasn't common, but in desperate winters, when the usual smokehouse was too wet or the salt had run low, peat burial was plan B, or C, or D. It might explain why a few archaeologists found animal bones far from settlements, tucked into the bogs like forgotten snacks. You ask how often fresh food arrives from elsewhere. Boats from the mainland, perhaps. They laugh, not unkindly, just knowingly. A few times a year, maybe. Sometimes not at all if the weather gets possessive. You ask what happens when food runs low. The answer is simple: eat less. Not in the poetic, noble way, just smaller portions, more broth, more reliance on what can be foraged, shellfish, limpets, roots from under rocks, and the ever-faithful kale grown in wind-stunted gardens called lazy beds. Ah yes, lazy beds. You're shown one near the back of the house, a series of low ridged rows of earth built atop seaweed and composted manure. A labour-intensive method that earned its ironic nickname from outsiders who didn't have to make them. The soil on this island is poor, rocky, acidic, unforgiving, but it produces just enough if you whisper to it nicely and never expect too much. Scholarly debate time. Some argue that the diet of these islanders was more nutritious than modern ones. Less sugar, more seaweed, omega-rich fish, and wild greens. Others point out the extreme caloric deficits during long winters and food shortages. Malnutrition was common, especially among children. But what's clear is that everything eaten here had a story, a history of effort behind it. Nothing was casual, nothing was wasteful. You're tasked with helping prepare a meal, and it feels like a sacred act. You peel carrots so small they could be mistaken for thumbs. You slice dried fish into thin strips with a knife that's older than your country. A small pot of stew bubbles gently over the fire, built around a single mutton bone that's done more shifts than it should have. Bread is sliced, dipped in broth to soften, and passed around. Everyone eats slowly. There's no rush. Food is not just nourishment. It's the reward for having endured another day. Afterwards, dishes are washed with seawater heated over the hearth, You help scrub with a brush made from straw and tied twine. There's no soap, just friction and routine. The bowl you used has scratches deep enough to tell its own story. Generations of meals and probably a few arguments. Before bed, the leftover fish is hung back above the fire, higher than curious dogs or children. The sour oat mixture is covered with a cloth and set near the embers to keep the fermentation alive. And the butter is placed on a cool stone slab near the wall, which stays colder than the rest of the room. The cow snores again. You do too, eventually, and as you drift off, full but not stuffed, your thoughts settle on something simple, quiet, and oddly reassuring. Every bite here comes from somewhere. From a hand, a net, a knife, a fire. You'll never look at a grocery store the same way again. You wake up to whispers. Not the soft kind that fade away when you shift in your bedding, but the heavy, hushed kind, weighted, clipped, reverent. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb the dog curled at your feet. The hearth has burned down to glowing embers, and for once no one moves to stoke it. Something is wrong. Not panicked, but off. The usual rhythm of the morning has been replaced by a stillness that presses against the stone walls like fog. You glance toward the hearth and notice it's already been swept. Too early. The children are quiet, seated near the doorway, legs crossed, eyes lowered. The cow hasn't been brought inside. The door stands slightly ajar, letting in a light that feels pale, unsure of itself. Then someone says it aloud, flat and final. He didn't come back. No one asks who. They already know. A cousin, maybe an uncle. You remember meeting him just days ago. A tall man with hands like paddles and a laugh that carried like wind through the ropes above. He'd gone out fishing yesterday before the storm crept in, thinking he could beat it. A quick trip. A good haul before the sea turned cruel. But he didn't come back. In a place like this, death doesn't arrive with sirens or headlines. It just doesn't come back through the door. There's no announcement, no official. Just a missing person and a knowing silence. You step outside and follow the others to the cliffs. The sea below is still restless, not quite calm, not quite angry. A low swell lifts and drops against the rocks with a rhythm that sounds like breathing. Slow, deep, and heavy. Far out, a seagull circles low over the water, and someone mutters a name under their breath like a prayer, or maybe a warning. Historical fact. Across the Hebrides, sea tragedies were common, and often went unrecorded. Entire generations lost family to storms, shipwrecks, or simply bad luck on open water. Boats capsized just offshore. Fishermen slipped between rocks. There were no life jackets, no coastguards, only the tide, and whether or not it felt generous that day. The family gathers on a ridge looking out over the Atlantic. No one weeps openly. A woman quietly presses a stone into the palm of a young boy, smooth, grey, worn by centuries of waves. He clutches it tightly and doesn't speak. The gesture is simple but heavy with meaning, holding something when there's nothing else to hold on to. The old man clears his throat and begins speaking. Not loudly, not formally, just enough for those nearby to hear. It's a mix of Gaelic and English, slow and winding. Not a sermon, not exactly a eulogy. It's more like a conversation with the sea, a recognition of debt, of loss, of the bargain everyone here makes just by living. And here's your fringe fact. In some Hebridean communities, when a fisherman was lost at sea, families would light a peat fire on the cliffs for several nights in a row, a beacon for the spirit to find its way home. Sometimes they'd leave the door of the black house open for an hour after sundown, in case the missing wished to return. Superstition? Maybe. Or maybe it's just what hope looks like when nothing else is left. There's still debate among historians about how deeply these maritime losses shaped the cultural DNA of the islands. Some argue that grief became embedded in the language, metaphors of tides, vanishings, long silences. Others see it more practically. Death was common, yes, but woven into daily life without ceremony. No monuments, no plaques, just memories passed from voice to voice. You return to the black house and feel the difference immediately. The house hasn't changed, but the air inside has. It's heavier now, settled. The fire is lit again, but lower than usual. Food is prepared, but no one's hungry. The animals are fed in silence. Life continues because it must, but not with the same rhythm. Something has shifted. You sit beside the fire and think of how this house, this low, stubborn shelter, has absorbed thousands of these moments. It's seen joy and pain in equal measure, and it doesn't flinch. The stones don't care. Or maybe they do, in the way that only ancient things can, quietly, steadily, by simply staying. Someone begins sewing in the corner, the thread pulling through the fabric with a sound that's oddly soothing. A boy draws a boat in the soot on the wall with a stick. You watch him without speaking. You don't need to. The house is full of unspoken words today. Later at dusk, the door is left open. No one announces it. No one mentions it. You notice the way the wind curls through, bringing the scent of salt and something wild. It doesn't rush in. It visits. The fire flutters. The air shifts. You think about the cousin, the one who didn't return. You imagine his boat perhaps still drifting far out, or maybe already claimed by the seafloor. You wonder if his last thoughts were of home, of the fire, of this stone house huddled against the cliff. You think about how fragile it all is. Life, balance, survival, and yet how solid the house feels around you. The walls hold you without effort. The roof creaks gently, the ropes straining but secure. The hearth flickers steadily, as if defying grief just by continuing to glow. Night falls, and the door is finally closed. Not slammed, just eased shut. The latch clicks. The cow shifts in her stall. A spoon stirs quietly in a pot. The youngest child hums an old tune, and someone else joins in softly, just above a whisper. You lie back in your bedding, the firelight painting shadows on the ceiling. Outside, the sea still breathes. It always will. And inside, the black house breathes too. It holds your grief and keeps you warm. It's strange how quickly the hearth goes back to being the centre of everything, even with loss still floating around the house like unburned smoke. There's no ceremony for returning to routine. It just happens. Someone adds more peat. Someone sets a pot to boil. No grand statements. Just the quiet rhythm of life reasserting itself, flicker by flicker, breath by breath. You're learning to read the fire now. Not just tend it, but understand it. You know when it needs a thicker chunk of peat versus something that will catch fast and lift the flame. You've figured out how to stir the ashes without choking everyone in the room. Your clothes carry the scent of it permanently now. So does your hair, your skin, your dreams. You start the day sitting on your usual three-legged stool, shoulders hunched toward the warmth, while the black house begins its slow shuffle of movement. It's always like this. First one person, then another, like dancers joining a very slow reel. Someone coughs, someone stretches, the cow snorts. Eventually the room is full again, and right in the middle, the hearth. Not just a fireplace, you've realised. It's the house's core. The place everything returns to. Every story starts here. Every secret is whispered within arm's reach of it. When someone laughs, they glance toward the fire like it might want to join in. When someone sighs, it's into the flames. Today you're told to help clean out the hearth. Not just scoop the ashes, but give it what the old woman calls a proper tending. This means scraping the inner stones, sweeping the soot into a worn copper pan, sifting through it for any unburned peat that can be reused. Nothing is wasted, nothing is casual, even the soot is saved, to be rubbed into leather, or mixed with lard for waterproofing, or, if you believe the child beside you, smeared on the cheeks of misbehaving cousins as a warning. Here's your historical fact. Black house hearths weren't just for warmth and cooking, they were multifunctional survival systems. The stone platform often included built-in iron hooks for hanging pots, flat stones for baking oatcakes, and spaces for drying herbs or fish. In some households, ashes were stored and later used in making lye soap, or even as a mild abrasive for cleaning. You spot a faint groove in one of the hearthstones, deep, curved, worn smooth. When you ask about it, someone tells you it's from generations of stirring, scraping, and setting pots. You run your fingers over it and feel a kind of quiet gravity. Thousands of hands have passed here, some with care, some with haste, but always with purpose. As the fire's cleaned and relit, the air fills again with that sweet earthy perfume of burning peat. It's richer in the morning somehow. You can smell layers in it. Damp moss, faint tar, a whisper of brine. You close your eyes and wonder how this smell hasn't been bottled and sold with a pretentious name like Odour Survival. Here's your quirky fringe fact. In some homes, particularly on smaller islands, the hearthstone itself was believed to be sacred. Not in a vague spiritual way, but in a literal, don't you dare move it sense. Stories tell of families who passed down their hearthstones like relics. One woman reportedly carried hers across 3 islands during an eviction in the 1800s, refusing to build a new fire until it was set properly. It wasn't just stone, it was memory, continuity, fire made solid. The scholarly question tied to all this: was the hearth a spiritual altar, or just the most reliable tool in a world that gave so little? Some anthropologists argue that it became a shrine by default, the only thing in the home that never moved, never slept, never died. Others think it was simply the most practical point in a practical life. But sit beside it long enough, and you start to understand. The line between sacred and useful doesn't exist here. The useful is sacred. You're handed a cast iron pan with a lump of dough in it. Your job? Flatten it, press it near the fire, and don't burn it. It's oatcake day. No sugar, no flour, no yeast. Just oats, a little water, salt, and heat. You shape the disc, your hands clumsy but improving, and set it on the hot flagstone near the flame. It sizzles faintly. Smells good somehow, like history. You sit and wait. No timer, no exact rules. Just your nose, and the way the edges crisp. When it's done, you break it with your fingers, pass half to the girl beside you, and eat it slowly, savouring the nutty taste and the tiny crunches of grit from the firestone. It's perfect. Not delicious maybe, but honest. Later you help dry seaweed over the hearth. It crackles slightly, darkening to greenish-black curls. The smell is odd, salty, vegetal, slightly burnt, but it will be crushed into flakes and used later for seasoning or mixed into broth. The hearth gives everything a second life. Nothing here gets just one chance to be useful. Even in the quietest moments, the hearth keeps moving. A kettle sighs, a fish hook warms near the flame. Wool dries on a line overhead, slowly shedding the last of its dampness into the rising smoke. By nightfall, the house is back into full rhythm. The day's labour is done. The smell of stew hangs in the air, seaweed, barley, something that might once have been lamb. People eat in small clusters, leaning close to the fire as if it might whisper something just to them. Someone tells a story about a boy who once tried to put out the fire by accident and was cursed to speak backward for a year. Everyone laughs. Even the fire seems to flicker in amusement. You curl up near the edge of the hearth, just close enough to feel its warmth, just far enough not to choke on the smoke. The stones are warm beneath your hand. The light is gold and low. You listen to the crackle, the creak of the roof ropes, the gentle stirrings of sleep. And as you drift off, the last thought in your head isn't your own. It's the fire saying quietly, "I'm still here." It starts with a cough, dry, persistent, from the far corner of the black house where the grandmother usually sits weaving. You don't think much of it at first. After all, this place is full of smoke, damp wool and shared air. Coughing is almost a background noise, part of the Black House soundtrack. But then the cough comes again, and again. By mid-morning she's not in her usual spot and the spinning wheel stands still. You find her lying on the box bed, bundled in layer upon layer of wool, her face pale and damp, breathing shallow and ragged. The room around her has taken on a different kind of quiet. Not reverent this time, but worried. The fire still burns and the kettle still simmers, but the centre of gravity has shifted. Everything tilts slightly toward her. Someone sends the oldest boy out to check the next croft over. A 5-mile walk minimum. They think there's a woman there who knows herbs, or maybe charms, maybe both. You aren't sure and no one explains. They just nod and the boy goes. You stay behind and help prepare the room, not that there's much to prepare. Curtains are drawn across the box bed. Peat smoke curls above the wooden frame, trailing upward into the thatch like it knows the way. A sprig of heather is tucked under the pillow. Another is burned. The smoke waved gently over her forehead. It smells sharp and medicinal, mixing with the ever-present scent of turf and salt. Historical fact: in remote Scottish communities, especially in the Hebrides, formal medicine was scarce well into the 20th century. A doctor might visit the island once a month, if the weather cooperated. More often, healing was handled by women who knew the properties of plants, prayers and ancient customs. They weren't doctors, they were keeners, herb wives, or spay women, titles earned not through certificates, but through survival. The woman who arrives hours later is short and silent, her hair tightly braided, her eyes sharp enough to cut kelp. She doesn't knock, just steps in, surveys the room, and nods once. She carries a basket full of strange-smelling roots, small cloth bundles tied with twine, and a jar of thick golden resin that smells like honey and grave dirt. No one questions her. She moves like the hearth does, slowly, deliberately, with an authority no one wants to challenge. She begins with the obvious, a cloth soaked in boiled herbs laid across the grandmother's chest, then a kind of tea, pungent and bitter, ladled between the woman's cracked lips. You offer to help, and she hands you a bundle of dried leaves, tells you to crush them into powder with a stone. No explanation, just do it. You obey. As you grind, she murmurs words under her breath. Not Gaelic, not English, something older. The rhythm is soft, hypnotic, and not meant for anyone else. Fringe fact of the day, some island healers practiced a form of blessing that blended pre-Christian incantations with Christian imagery. These rituals weren't written down, just remembered, handed down from mother to daughter like recipes. One common element, circling the sick person with smoke, usually from herbs or burning wool, while muttering words meant to confuse or chase off illness. The sickness wasn't just physical, it was often treated like a spirit, a visitor that needed eviction. You glance at the black house walls, wondering how many times this very act has been performed in this very room. The stones have seen it all. Births, fevers, wounds, heartbreak. They don't judge, they just absorb. The old woman starts to breathe easier by nightfall. Still weak, still pale, but the rasp is softer. You sit nearby, watching the healer wrap her tools back into their cloth. She doesn't ask for money, just a jar of butter and some dried fish. She leaves without a word, vanishing into the darkness like a ghost clocking out of a long shift. You sleep uneasily that night, curled beside the hearth, listening to the grandmother's breathing. It's steady, but fragile. Every exhale feels like a coin tossed into a well. You catch yourself holding your breath alongside her, counting the seconds between. 1, 2, 3, relief. In the morning, the fire is already going. The house has shifted back into motion, but quieter now. Everyone moves gently, voices low, footsteps soft. It's a kind of domestic hush, a storm of a different kind. The children stay close. The men go about their tasks without argument. No one mentions the word better, not yet. The sea might hear. You help make a poultice, mashing boiled kelp into a thick paste that smells like the wrong end of a sea creature. It's applied to the grandmother's feet, and someone begins rubbing her hands, slow circles, murmuring old phrases with the rhythm of a lullaby. Here's your scholarly debate for the evening. Were these healing practices genuinely effective or purely psychological? Some argue that herbal remedies had real pharmacological benefits: meadowsweet for fevers, yarrow for bleeding, kelp for mineral deficiency. Others argue that the effectiveness lay in community, the sense of care, of ritual, of not being alone. But maybe, just maybe, the point was never to separate the two. In places like this, body and spirit are treated together. You glance at the fire again. It hasn't gone out. Not once. The grandmother opens her eyes that evening just for a moment. She looks around the room, sees the faces of her kin, the walls she's stared at for decades, the ropes above her that hold the roof together, and then she smiles. Not big, not loud, but like someone remembering the punchline to a joke that's kept them going all their life. You feel something shift in the house again. Not noise, not movement, just release. She's still here, the fire's still burning, and for one more day the island wins. There's something in the air that evening, something quieter than weather, deeper than smoke. It drifts through the black house, not like a draft, but like a memory, unspoken but impossible to ignore. You sit near the hearth, tracing the grain in your wooden cup, watching the fire flicker against the soot-dark walls. Everyone's settled, but no one's really resting. It's one of those nights where people start telling stories not because they want to, but because something ancient in the air demands it. It starts with the old man. No announcement, no theatrical pause. He just begins speaking in that low, creaky voice that sounds like wind rubbing against stone. He talks about a winter where snow came sideways for 9 days straight, and the sea froze in the shallows. He says the sheep had to be brought inside, all of them, and that the house stank like the devil's own pockets. But no one complained because no one died. You all chuckle at that. Not because it's funny, but because death here is always just outside the door waiting for its turn. Then the middle daughter chimes in with a story about a neighbour who once saw lights dancing over the moor and swore it was a selkie trying to lure him into the sea. Everyone nods knowingly. No one questions whether it's true. Truth, you're starting to learn, bends differently in a black house. It's shaped more by how often it's been told than whether it ever happened. Someone else brings up a woman who lived alone in a turf house near the cliffs, and how her chickens started laying black eggs after her husband drowned. Someone else adds that she never spoke again, only sang. The stories circle like peat smoke, slow and curling and slightly intoxicating. The children listen wide-eyed. The adults mostly listen to each other, waiting to catch any slip in the retelling, any missed detail. Memory is a group sport here. You look around and realise just how many layers the house holds. Not just walls and roof, but voices, echoes, laughter you weren't here for, warnings you'll remember even though they weren't meant for you. Historical fact. Black houses were often passed down through generations, not just as homes but as archives. Without books, without photographs, oral tradition was everything. The house itself became a vessel for memory. Every beam, every stone held stories. Who carved what into the lintel, who was born in which bed, who died sitting in which chair by the fire. The very shape of the house held the shape of the family. You touch the wall beside you, stone, cool and rough beneath your fingertips, but pulsing with something warmer. You think about how many hands have touched this same spot, how many voices bounced off this same curve of wall, how many secrets were whispered here, and which ones the house remembers. Someone starts a new story, this one quieter. It's about a woman whose husband never returned from sea, not an uncommon theme, but instead of grieving, she lit a lamp in the window every night for 7 years. The children interrupt, asking, "And then he came back?" But the storyteller shakes her head. No, but once someone saw a gull with his eyes. That's it. That's the story. And somehow that's enough. Here's your fringe fact. In some black houses, it was common to believe that the walls could hold emotions. It was said that arguments left a mark, that laughter lingered in the smoke, that sorrow could soak into the stone and stay for years. Some families would even move beds away from a particular patch of wall after a death, fearing that too much grief had settled there. Others believed walls could listen to bad luck and reflect it back, so stories were told in certain corners and not others. This leads to an old academic debate. Were these beliefs metaphoric, or did they represent a kind of domestic animism, a belief that the house itself was alive, aware, maybe even protective? Some scholars claim it was symbolic. Others argue that when you rely on a structure to literally keep death out, the line between shelter and spirit blurs pretty fast. You feel it now more than ever. The Black House isn't just a building, it's a participant. It hums quietly during the stories, the firelight flickering against its walls like eyelids blinking slowly in sleep. You wonder if it likes the stories, or if it just tolerates them, the way it tolerates the smoke, the damp, the wind pressing in around the edges. Eventually the storytelling trails off. No one announces it. It just fades. Someone tosses another peat brick onto the fire. The youngest child curls up under a blanket near the hearth, mouth slightly open, dreaming of gulls and selkies and black eggs. You settle into your place for the night and think about all the houses you've lived in, all the places you've called home. None of them ever felt quite like this. None of them ever listened. Because that's what these walls do. They listen. To stories, to storms, to silence, and they remember. That's the eerie part, really. Not that people once believed walls could hold memories, but that when you're inside one of these old black houses, you start to believe it too. The fire hisses softly. The roof creaks once. The wind pushes gently against the stones, then gives up. And the house, your house for now, holds it all in. At first it sounds like nothing, just absence, a lack. The kind of silence that settles when even the chickens forget to squawk, when the dog doesn't bark at the wind, when the fire crackles so quietly you wonder if it's apologising for being the only thing still awake. You step outside into a world that feels wiped clean. No wind, no sea spray, not even a gull crying overhead. It's as if the storm peeled away the outer layer of the island and left behind something raw and reverent. The sky's pale, barely blue, and the sun hangs low like it's not quite sure it wants to come up today. The grass lies pressed to the earth, still wet from rain and thick with the scent of peat and salt. You take a deep breath and the air tastes brand new, brighter, colder, heavy in the lungs like water that hasn't been disturbed in years. You turn back toward the black house and see it properly for the first time since the storm. No curtain of rain obscuring it, no fog pressing in at the corners, just stone, turf, rope, and silence. Not the haunted kind, but something gentler. A hush that asks you to lower your voice, a kind of post-storm holiness. Inside, the hearth still burns. It always does. A single red coal glowing in the ash, quietly pulsing like the last heartbeat of yesterday. You add a brick of peat without speaking. The flame accepts it without drama, curling up around it like a cat settling onto a warm lap. You sit and listen to the creaks of the house as it stretches back into itself, the way a body does after a long illness. Even stone needs to breathe. Historical fact. In the Hebrides, the day after a storm was often treated like a small Sabbath. Not formally, not with prayers or ritual, but with respect. There was work to do, always. But there was also a kind of awe, a grateful caution, an unspoken agreement not to rush back into noise too soon. You didn't shout across the fields. You didn't argue. You just checked. Checked the walls, the roof, the animals, the people. And if they were all still standing, you nodded and kept moving, and that's what you do today. You move with the others in a kind of quiet procession, circling the black house, testing the anchor ropes, running your fingers along the seams between stone. Nothing major has come loose. The roof held. The door needs its hinges reset, and there's a fresh leak over the byre where the cow sleeps, but nothing that can't be fixed. Nothing that broke you. You help gather tools, rusted hammers, a mallet made from driftwood, twisted nails pulled from old boats and bent back into usefulness. A boy climbs onto the roof with a length of new rope coiled like a python around his shoulders. He ties it off without speaking, his mouth set in a line, his eyes scanning the horizon like he's daring the next storm to try again. The grandmother watches from the doorway, wrapped in her shawl, pale but upright. She says nothing either. She doesn't need to. Her breath is visible in the morning chill, and the way it curls out from her mouth and disappears tells you everything you need to know. She's still here. Here's your fringe fact. Some islanders believed that the storm itself was a kind of judgment, not divine in a religious sense, but personal, that the sea watched how you lived, and the wind tested what you built, and if you passed, it left you alone, for a while. Some even left offerings after a storm, a bit of bread, a pinch of salt, a few words whispered to the waves, just to say thank you for missing me this time. You find yourself whispering something under your breath as you help reseal the window slit. You don't even know what language it's in. It just comes out, soft, instinctual. Maybe the house understands. Later, the inside of the black house feels different. Lighter somehow, though the walls haven't moved. The air doesn't feel as thick. The children laugh again, not loudly, but without hesitation. The cow eats with more enthusiasm than usual, slopping water across the floor and nearly knocking over a basin. No one scolds her. The storm's over. Let her live. You sit by the fire and help the middle daughter comb wool. It's tedious, repetitive work, dragging coarse hair through small hook teeth until it starts to resemble something soft. Your fingers cramp. You drop the comb. She picks it up and hands it back with a smirk, then shows you again how to keep the rhythm steady. Pull, release. Pull, release. Just like breathing. And that's the thing. The storm held your breath. Every gust was a clenched fist. Every snap of rope a missed heartbeat. But now the island exhales. Not in relief exactly. It never truly relaxes, but in recognition. You made it through. Again. A small feast is laid out that night. Not because there's abundance, but because the family wants to mark the moment. There's fish, of course, and a barley broth so thick you could stand a spoon in it. Someone opens a jar of pickled sea purslane and passes it around with a warning that it might sting the tongue. It does, but it's good. Sharp, honest. A reminder that taste buds are also survivors. The meal ends with laughter. Real open laughter that fills the black house in a way you didn't realize it hadn't in days. The walls catch it, absorb it, and offer it back as warmth. You lean against the stone and close your eyes, letting it wash over you. There's music too. A fiddle drawn out from a wooden case strung and tuned with reverence. The man playing it sits beside the hearth, tapping his foot on the flagstone, eyes closed. The tune is simple, melancholy, beautiful. And just like that, the silence of the storm's aftermath is transformed. It doesn't vanish. It evolves into music. into laughter, into breathing. You fall asleep that night not with dread, but with gratitude. The kind that comes when nothing spectacular happens. Just survival. Just peace, however brief. The house holds you. The fire breathes beside you. The ropes above creak with contentment, and the silence at last becomes something soft. There's a moment, in the quiet lull between chores and supper, where you find yourself standing outside staring at the black house like you're seeing it for the first time. The walls look a little less ancient in the pale sun, the roof a bit more tattered after the storm, but what strikes you now, what you hadn't quite realised before, is the architecture of acceptance baked into every corner of this house. These buildings weren't just designed to shelter life, they were built with death in mind too. No one tells you this directly. It just becomes obvious the longer you stay. The black house doesn't flinch when someone dies. It doesn't change. It has a way of folding the absence into its corners, absorbing grief the same way it absorbs smoke, slowly and without ceremony. And in a strange way, the design almost expects it. You're invited to help clean the byre section, the part of the house where the animals stay, and it's while scrubbing peat-sodden muck from the stone floor that someone mentions it, casually, like talking about the weather. This is where we kept my grandfather's body after. You pause, unsure if you misheard, but they continue, not even looking up. Winter was too hard. Couldn't bury him till spring. So we laid him here, beside the cow. She didn't mind. You look at the space differently now. The low beam overhead, the flat stone shelf by the wall, the same stones that now hold a bucket and a pile of damp straw once held a body. No headstone, no ceremony, just waiting, preserved by cold, kept near the fire. It's not morbid, it's just how things are. Here's your historical fact. In some parts of the Hebrides, particularly on the more remote islands, harsh winters and frozen ground meant that burials couldn't always happen right away. Bodies were kept indoors, often in the byre until the thaw. They were wrapped, laid respectfully and watched over, not hidden, not denied. It was considered a continuation of care. You want to ask more, but there's a strange tension around the subject. Not fear, just caution. Like words might tempt the wrong kind of attention. You sweep in silence for a while, trying not to think about how many people the house has held, alive and otherwise. Fringe fact, some black houses were constructed with what some scholars believe were intentional death corners, quiet areas near the far end of the house, away from the hearth where the dying were laid. These weren't formal rooms, just shaded spots, separated by nothing more than habit and understanding. It was believed that the soul needed a calm place to leave the body, and the noise of daily life around the fire could confuse it. You return to the hearth and sit quietly, a little more aware now of the layers beneath your feet. The floor you walk on has likely hosted a birth, a death, a marriage, and 1,000 other private moments no one will ever name, and that's the unsettling beauty of the black house. It isn't sentimental, but it remembers everything. Even the design reflects this duality. The box beds, those deep wooden alcoves built into the walls, are warm, yes, protective, yes, but also eerily coffin-like. You sleep in them tucked in with thick covers, a small candle flickering near your head, and for a moment each night, just before your eyes close, you can't help but think, this is what it might feel like. There's no fear in it, just familiarity. Like the house is saying, you'll leave someday, but not yet. Scholarly debate time. Anthropologists have long wrestled with whether black houses reflected a death-aware culture, or simply adapted out of necessity. Was it spiritual architecture, or logistical pragmatism? Some argue the layout intentionally acknowledged mortality, placing the byre, where animals died and people too sometimes lingered near death, right beside the living quarters to reinforce life's fragility. Others argue it was just about heat conservation and ease of access, but maybe it was both. In these houses, life and death weren't neighbours, they were roommates. Later that night, the topic comes up again, this time in a more familiar tone. A teenage boy, half dozing near the hearth, tells you that when his great-aunt died, they left a candle burning for 3 days beside her bed. Not for light, he says, but so she'd find her way out. You ask if that worked. He shrugs. We haven't seen her, have we? There's laughter at that. Not mocking, just weary. Like people who've made their peace with the fact that ghosts, if they exist, probably have better things to do than haunt people who already live this close to death. You ask where people are buried now, and they point to a small rise beyond the pasture. No headstones, just low, weathered slabs half swallowed by grass. You walk there the next morning, alone, your boots squelching through the boggy turf. The wind picks up as you approach, not fiercely, just enough to remind you that this land doesn't give anything away easily. Not food, not shelter, not peace. The graves are simple, some marked with names, some not. One stone has only a cross carved shallow and weathered to a suggestion. Another is completely blank, except for a bit of lichen shaped like a sleeping dog. You kneel and press your hand to one of the stones. It's cold, but not unfriendly. On your way back to the Black House, you realise you've stopped thinking of the place as just a house. It's something else. A container, a witness, a waiting room. And when you step inside, the fire greets you like it knows where you've been. You sit again in your place, now conscious of every echo beneath you. The lives that warmed this hearth before, the bodies it kept warm after. The Black House holds you close, not because it loves you, but because that's what it does. You walk out alone just after sunrise, the sky bleeding a pale wash of gold over the hills. The air is still, crisp, and damp enough to kiss your eyelashes. It's quiet. So quiet that your footsteps sound louder than they should, squishing softly in the peat-soft earth. There's no path, not really, just a pattern of flattened grass and memory guiding your way. You're not told where to go this morning. You just feel it. Some quiet thread tugging you toward the far end of the croft, where the land falls gently down to the sea and the horizon feels closer than usual. It's here, in this patch of soft ground behind the Black House, that the ancestors sleep. Not in a grand cemetery, not behind iron gates, just here, on land walked daily by cows, sheep and grandchildren in muddy boots. You almost step on one of the stones before you realise what it is. It's small, rounded, sunken, half covered by grass and lichen. No inscription, no date. But it means something. You feel it the way you'd feel a breath on your neck. Present, invisible, undeniable. You glance back toward the Black House, now just a shadow of turf and rope against the greening hills. It's so close you could throw a stone and hit it. That's the point, of course. The dead were buried near the home, not out of morbidity, but out of loyalty, out of practicality, and maybe, just maybe, out of love. Historical fact. In many Hebridean communities, especially on the smaller islands, families buried their dead on their own land, often within sight of the Black House. These weren't formal graveyards, but personal plots, unmarked or lightly marked, with flat stones and no fences. The proximity was deliberate. Death wasn't kept at arm's length. It was folded into the land, into daily life, and into the rhythm of home. You wander through the grass, eyes catching the subtle changes in the landscape, slight mounds, odd-shaped rocks, low hollows that seem too even to be natural. The ground is quiet, yes, but it's busy. It remembers more footsteps than your mind could handle. You pause at a larger stone, heart-shaped and jagged, with a line of moss growing perfectly down its centre. Someone left a feather on top of it, black, curved, still slick from last night's dew. A raven's, maybe. Or something else. No one taught you the rules here, but instinct tells you not to touch it. You let the feather be. Here's your fringe fact. Some families believed that their ancestors were literally part of the land. That over time, as the bodies decayed and the soil absorbed their bones, the land itself gained memory. The wind was said to carry their voices, the fog their stories. It wasn't poetic, it was practical cosmology. They didn't just live on the land, they became it. The academic debate here is delicate. Some scholars argue that burial within view of the Black House reinforced a sense of permanence in communities otherwise shaped by transience. Storms, migration, forced evictions. Others suggest it was simply the only land available, the churchyard too distant, the boat trip too costly. But whatever the reason, the result is the same. Life and death existed together, not apart. You return slowly, shoes soaked, heart strangely full. Something about seeing the graves so close makes the laughter inside the Black House sound brighter when you step back in. The children are playing with bits of wool, tossing them in the air like snow. The cow is being milked in her stall, swishing her tail with the smug contentment of someone who knows her value. The fire is crackling again, and someone's baking oatcakes directly on the flagstone. You sit and sip something hot, probably tea, though it tastes faintly of smoke and something floral. and find yourself watching the shadows on the walls. You start to realise how many people those walls must have watched. Not just in the everyday ways, eating, sleeping, aging, but in the hardest moments. Births that didn't go well. Children who coughed too long. Old men who just stopped waking up one day. You learn that day that there's another kind of walk people take. One not for herding or hauling peat, but for remembering. It's done in silence, often alone. A route from the hearth to the grave and back again. No flowers, no speeches, just presence. A reminder that we don't disappear, we just shift rooms. Someone tells you later, with a quiet smile, that they sometimes ask their grandmother questions out by the grave. Not out loud, just in the head. And sometimes they get answers. You ask how. They just shrug. You feel it in the bones. That night the fire burns lower than usual, and the room takes on a different kind of glow. Not sombre, not eerie, just deeper. Like the shadows have stories of their own tonight. Someone starts humming an old air, soft and slow, and the others begin joining in, one voice at a time, like stones being placed gently into a wall. And then the older woman, the one who rarely speaks unless she's correcting your grip on a tool, tells a story about her mother. Not a ghost story, not a tale of warning, just a memory. A morning spent gathering mussels, a fight over who stole whose boots, a laugh that echoed through the black house until even the peat smoke seemed to shake with it. She looks at the hearth as she finishes, not with sadness but recognition. She sat right there, she says, in your spot. And just like that, the whole room exhales, because here the past doesn't hang heavy. It sits beside you. It shares your fire. It sleeps just beyond the wall, beneath the soft turf and the patient stones. You're sitting outside when the wind picks up again. Not a storm this time, but that highland wind that means business even on a clear day. It sweeps across the moor with a child's impatience, tugging at your collar, flipping up your sleeves, and scattering whatever thoughts you had the moment before. The grass flattens and dances, the sheep huddle close to the stone walls, and above it all, the children run like they've been uncaged, shrieking with laughter as they lean into the wind like birds who forgot they couldn't fly. You watch them go, barefoot, reckless, tough as anything you'll ever be. One girl has a string of seaweed tied around her forehead like a crown. A boy launches himself off a rock, lands hard, rolls up, and keeps going. They don't wear jackets. Their hair is wild, their knees are scratched, and not a single one of them seems concerned about the wind knocking them over. In fact, it seems like they dare it to try. Inside, the adults don't even glance out the window slit. They know this drill. Let the wind raise the kids, they seem to say. It's been doing it longer than we have. You step back into the black house, brushing bits of grass from your hair, and are promptly handed a bundle of wool to card. No explanation. Just the look that says, your turn. You sit by the hearth again, hands moving, watching the fibres puff and tangle and stretch. The same way, maybe, the island's raised its children for generations, coarse at first, but softening with time, shaped by touch. Historical fact. Children raised in the Hebrides were expected to contribute to the household from an early age. Herding, gathering, knitting, fishing. Play was a luxury that usually happened in tandem with work. But the harshness of life didn't mean they were joyless. Oral accounts often describe childhood here as wild, free, and deeply connected to the land. The island didn't coddle, but it didn't cage either. You ask one of the women what games they played growing up. She smiles and lists them off like she's counting old friends. Stone races, shell picking, mock fishing, and storm walking, where they try to run straight into the wind and see who could hold their ground the longest. Another woman joins in and recalls a game where you had to sneak around the house without being seen by the cow. If she mooed, you lost. No one explains why that was the rule, but you don't question it. You've learned not to. Fringe fact. In some of the more isolated islands, children were taught to mimic the sounds of birds and seals as part of their play. It wasn't just for fun. It helped during hunting, fishing, and sometimes even spiritual practices. Imitation wasn't just a game, it was preparation. The environment wasn't something to observe, it was something to become. You look at the children again, now crouched around a puddle like it holds treasure. One of them is talking to it, a steady stream of words in Gaelic, and the others listen solemnly. You catch a few phrases. Something about a fish prince and a stolen shell. They nod like they're discussing current affairs. You ask the boy later when he wanders inside for a drink what he was saying. He shrugs. Telling the puddle a story, he says. It was bored. There's still debate among folklorists about the extent to which children's games in rural Scottish communities were linked to ancient myth. Some argue that stories about selkies, sea spirits and stone giants were consciously passed down through play. Others think it's more organic, children naturally folding local myth into their world the way they fold nettles into pretend stew. Either way, the result is the same. The line between imagination and belief is blurred. Beautifully so. By late afternoon, the children have all vanished into the hills. No one is worried. You, however, can't stop glancing out toward the cliffs, wondering how far they've gone. The man sitting nearest you chuckles. They'll come back when they're hungry, he says, or when the wind gets bored of them. You laugh, but quietly, because it's true. Later the kids do return, flushed and muddy, arms full of treasures, driftwood, feathers, a cracked piece of ceramic that might be part of a plate or a very determined crab. They dump their haul by the hearth and sort it like archaeologists. Each item gets its moment. A whisper, a theory, a vote. One shell gets named. One stick becomes a wand. The piece of ceramic is proclaimed a dragon skin, and no one questions it. It's placed in a niche in the stone wall like it's a relic. You ask if they ever get bored out here. No television, no phones, no YouTube. One of the older boys gives you a look so sharp you feel a little embarrassed. We've got the wind, he says, and stories, and the ghosts. Why would we need more? You don't answer, because he's right. The black house holds those children like it holds the smoke. Part of the air, part of the roof beams, part of the dust in your teeth. They tumble around the hearth, whisper into walls, sleep with their heads tucked under arms like puppies, and every time they run out the door into the wind, it feels like the house sighs just a little, letting them go, knowing they'll be back when the clouds get dark or their stomachs growl. You go to sleep that night to the sound of the wind still testing the ropes on the roof, but it doesn't feel threatening anymore. It feels like breath. Like the island itself is inhaling, exhaling, and raising its next generation the same way it always has, with stone, with story, and with storms, and maybe, just maybe, with joy. You've seen fire keep people alive, you've seen the Black House hold off storms with nothing but rope and rock. But today, you're about to witness something even older, even harder to describe. A ceremony. Not a big, polished, fancy one with robes and rehearsed lines. This is a Black House kind of ceremony, rough around the edges, whispered between breaths, and stitched together with threadbare tradition. A life event, a ritual, a pause in time. It begins before dawn, with the soft shuffle of boots on stone, and the sound of someone cleaning the hearth with a little more reverence than usual. You sit up in your straw bedding and see them there. 3 of them, shoulders bent toward the coals, brushing ash into a wooden bowl as if gathering something sacred. The air is thick with it, expectation, and a strange kind of warmth. You don't know what's happening, but the house does. You can feel it in the walls. Then someone says the word, weddin'. That's all it takes. The rhythm of the day flips. Everything is familiar but charged. Like all the normal chores have put on their Sunday clothes. The fire burns a little brighter. The food is stirred more carefully. People whisper instructions in low voices, argue softly about who's doing what, and more than once you hear, "Ah, it's fine. It's just a wedding, not the Queen's visit." Historical fact. Black Houses hosted countless ceremonies, weddings, births, deaths, often all in the same room, sometimes within the same year. There was no separate church hall or event space. If something happened, it happened in the house. And it wasn't about decoration. It was about proximity, warmth, survival, and community. You offer to help and are immediately handed a broom made from tied heather and instructed to sweep the floor like you're expecting God to visit. It's a high bar, but you do your best. The others work around you, scrubbing pots, boiling water, picking sprigs of fresh herbs for something that might pass as table decor. A man is tasked with retrieving a hen. Not for food, you hope. The bride is already in the house, which surprises you. She's sitting near the fire, barefoot, hair still damp from a rushed wash, wrapped in her everyday dress with a fresh linen apron tied around her waist. There's no veil, no flowers, no makeup. Just her, sipping tea and smiling like someone who's about to jump into the sea not because it's warm, but because it's right. The groom is outside helping mend a fence, because of course the fence broke today, A sheep escaped. A cow wandered too far. So before he says any vows, he hammers a post back into the ground. No one thinks this is unusual. Life doesn't pause for poetry. Here's your fringe fact. In Hebridean custom, wedding preparations often included fixing up not just people, but property. If a house was to be joined to another family through marriage, it had to be inspected, reinforced, and sometimes blessed. That meant tightening ropes, shoring up walls, even patching leaks. The logic was simple. If the house wasn't ready for the future, the couple wouldn't be either. By mid-morning, people begin arriving, on foot of course, and in pairs like starlings. No fancy coats, just wool cloaks, scarves, the occasional piece of jewellery that's clearly been handed down too many times to count. They bring gifts, dried fish, jars of salt, a fine comb made from whalebone. A few bring songs, which they carry in their throats like offerings. The ceremony itself takes place in front of the hearth. The fire is fed fresh peat. The bride stands to the left of it, the groom to the right. An elder, no priest, just the oldest relative who remembers how to say the right words, steps forward. He clears his throat, looks at each of them, then at the fire and begins. The words are soft, Gaelic mostly. A few English phrases tucked in like shy guests. The elder speaks of warmth, of trust, of long winters and the kind of partnership that has nothing to do with romance novels and everything to do with splitting firewood and burying parents. He says, there will be storms, and no one laughs. But when he says, there will be bread, someone does. You can barely hear the vows, but they're not meant for you. They're spoken directly to each other, quietly, privately, with hands clasped and thumbs rubbing nervous circles into knuckles. No one claps, no one shouts. When it's done, the bride and groom simply sit, right by the hearth, side by side, sharing a bowl of stew. And just like that, they're married. Here's the scholarly question. Are these rituals simplified because of poverty and isolation, or are they richer for their closeness to daily life? Some argue that the intimacy of the Black House wedding is born from necessity. There's no room for extravagance. But others point out that there's power in simplicity. That stripping a ritual down to its bones often reveals what truly matters. In this case, warmth, food, community, and a fire that never goes out. The meal after is more generous than usual. Someone breaks out a slab of cheese saved for a special day. There's bannock bread hot from the hearthstone, and a dark cake made with barley, dried berries, and something sweet you can't quite place. Ale is passed around, and someone uncorks a bottle of clear liquid that smells like it could dissolve the roof if spilled. The singing starts soon after. At first it's the older women, harmonising in soft tones that make the air feel thick with history. Then the fiddle appears again, and the mood lifts. Feet stomp. A spoon becomes an instrument. The groom dances with the bride, then with the grandmother, then with the cow. The last one's a joke, mostly. You sit near the hearth, watching it all unfold. The house is full, body to body, voice to voice, and the warmth is almost unbearable. But you don't move. You let the fire soak into your skin. You let the music wrap around your chest. You feel every stone in the wall pulsing with life. At some point the bride stands and places a piece of oatcake on the hearthstone. Not in it, just on it. No one explains why. No one needs to. It's a gift for the house, for the ancestors, for the future. Later, when the guests are gone and the hearth glows low, the bride and groom lay a blanket down beside the fire and lie there, shoulder to shoulder. There's no honeymoon suite. Just warmth. Just stone. Just the same house that has seen 1,000 winters and now, one more marriage. You lie down too and close your eyes. The ropes creak above, the embers sigh, and the Black House holds the moment like it holds all things, gently, without pride. Just long enough to let it live. You don't notice the man at first. He stands at the edge of the croft, arms folded, cap low, as still as one of the boundary stones. It's only when he shifts his weight and the sheep startle slightly that you realise he's not part of the landscape. Not quite. His boots are too polished, his coat too clean, his clipboard too dry. You're not the only one who sees him. The family's mood tightens in an instant, like a breeze cutting through wool. Eyes narrow, voices lower. Even the cow seems to hold her breath. The man steps forward, nods to no one in particular, and introduces himself in a voice with round vowels and city edges. Government, he says, from the mainland, just here to check in. a harmless phrase, except no one here believes in harmless phrases from men with paper. He asks questions about the house, about the animals, about how many people sleep here, how often they clean, whether the roof leaks, whether they've considered moving. His words are wrapped in bureaucratic politeness, but they land like stones in stew, offensive mostly because they're so bland. Historical fact: by the mid-20th century, many black houses came under scrutiny by housing authorities who deemed them unfit for habitation. Reports described them as unhygienic, outdated, and overcrowded. They lacked plumbing, proper ventilation, and in the eyes of modern planners, dignity. Offers were made, subsidies for relocation, promises of concrete and insulation, and windows that didn't cry salt. But what looked like progress to officials often felt like erasure to the people who lived here. The man doesn't understand the hearth. He gestures toward it and says something about carbon monoxide and fire risk. You nearly laugh. You want to tell him the fire has saved more lives than it's ever endangered. But no one says a word. The family listens, nods politely, and says almost nothing. They've done this before. They know how to let the wind blow through without letting it touch them. Still, the air is different after he leaves. The fire burns with a quieter flame. Chores are done more stiffly. You hear muttering, not loud enough to be called speech. The black house feels more fragile today, not because anything has changed structurally, but because someone looked at it like it was broken. Fringe fact: in the 1950s and 60s, entire Hebridean villages were cleared of black houses, not forcibly perhaps, but with the weight of state-backed shame. Families were moved into white houses, modern rectangular structures with concrete walls and tiled roofs. They were easier to clean, easier to sell, but colder, both in temperature and soul. Some who moved returned, some never unpacked. You speak to the father that night, asking him why they stay. His face is hard to read in the firelight, lines deepened by wind, by loss, by years of bracing against questions like yours. Because this house has memory, he says. The new ones, they have walls, but not memory. You think about that as you lie awake staring up at the ropes that hold the roof. They look older now, more tired. You wonder if the clipboard man saw those ropes and thought, that's dangerous. Or, that's outdated. Or worse, that's quaint. Here's the academic debate. Should traditional homes like black houses be preserved as living heritage, or gently retired into museum pieces? Some scholars argue that restoring and maintaining them as dwellings romanticizes hardship. Others claim that removing people from them erases a culture still breathing. Preservation or patronization? Celebration or sterilization? You rise early the next morning, determined to help repair whatever might draw attention again. The door latch is loose, the turf around the roofline needs tucking, and one of the anchor stones has slid a bit in the rain. You work with the others, silent, focused, sleeves rolled. The old woman mutters something about keeping the house proud. You nod. You get it now. Midday, a neighbour stops by, asks if the man with the clipboard came to their place too. He did. She spits into the grass, says nothing else, and hands over a jar of pickled kelp like a peace offering. You don't ask what the jar's for. Maybe it's just to feel normal again. The evening brings wind, but not the stormy kind. It's the gentler cousin, the breeze that smells of salt and carries distant bird calls. The fire crackles with new peat. The mood lifts slightly. Someone tells a story about a time the sea threw a whole crate of oranges onto the beach and the entire village feasted on citrus for 3 days straight. It sounds ridiculous, but no one doubts it. You've learned by now that the most unbelievable things here are usually the truest. You glance around the black house, at the stone walls, at the rope-bound roof, at the soot-dusted beams, and you realise something subtle but vital. This house doesn't just keep the wind out. It keeps the world at bay. It filters it. It slows it down until it can be translated into something human. A place like this doesn't survive in spite of its age. It survives because of it. Later, when the fire burns low and most of the family has gone to bed, you linger. You place another peat brick onto the coals, careful to lay it just right. You run your hand along the stone wall beside you, rough and cool, your fingers falling into familiar grooves. You sit, waiting for the house to settle, to sigh, to let you know it's okay again. And when it does, just a small creak from the roof, a slow exhale of smoke from the hearth. You feel it in your chest. This house still holds. And it will, clipboard or no clipboard. Packing isn't loud. That's the strangest part. No wailing, no slamming, no dramatic gestures. Just the soft, resigned thump of wool being folded, the slow clink of jars placed carefully into baskets, the occasional sigh that doesn't need translating. The family doesn't talk much as they move through the black house, gathering what they can carry. Not because there's nothing to say, there's too much to say, but because speaking it aloud might split them wide open. You're not leaving, but they are. Forced relocation, they call it. Modernization. A government scheme. The same man with the clipboard returned, this time with forms and a thin smile and promises of houses with plumbing and glass windows that don't cry when the wind howls. Promises of warmth, of comfort, of new lives in new homes that haven't heard a single story. The father signed the form. You saw the way his hand hovered before the pen touched the page, the way his name looked strange and crooked on the paper, like it didn't belong there. And now, here you are, in the final days. The black house is quiet, still warm, still solid, but it knows. It feels it. The way an old dog feels a departure before the suitcase ever moves. You help gather things that feel weightier than they are. A teacup with a chip that fits your thumb perfectly. A bit of rope, so frayed it's more memory than material. A child's carved driftwood spoon. No one speaks of what's being left behind. The peat fire still burns, lower now, almost politely, as if trying not to intrude. It won't be put out until the last minute. No one says it, but you all understand. Letting the hearth die early would be a kind of betrayal. Historical fact. During the 20th century, particularly from the 1930s onward, the British and Scottish governments promoted relocation programs to move families out of what were deemed unsanitary traditional homes. Black houses, many of them still lived in, were classified as substandard, and families were offered modern homes, often built just across the croft, within sight of their former dwellings. Some moved willingly, others signed papers under pressure, and the black houses were left to crumble. You wander through the house one last time, touching the walls with your fingertips. The stone is cool but familiar. You know the spots where the soot fades into pale grey. You know the floor's slight tilt. You know where the wind sneaks in when no one's looking. And now it's all being left. Every memory, every creak, every ghost. Fringe fact. In some parts of the Hebrides, there were quiet rituals for leaving a black house. They weren't formal, weren't written down. But people would sweep the hearth clean, leave a piece of bread or a shell by the door or whisper a goodbye into the corner of the room. One woman recalled pressing her forehead against the wall where her mother had died, and just breathing there for a long time. You don't leave a house, she said, you ask its permission. You watch the children walk from room to room, their play subdued. One girl ties a bit of red yarn around a nail in the wall and leaves it dangling. When you ask why, she shrugs. So it remembers me. There's your scholarly debate. What happens to a memory when the container is left behind? Some anthropologists argue that memory is carried in objects, in language, in bodies. Others believe that place, stone, layout, smell is essential, that ripping a family from their home, even for good reason, still severs something deep, a kind of cultural ligament. Once broken, it doesn't heal the same way. The final box is packed. The mother walks the length of the house one more time. She adjusts a crooked rope overhead, wipes the sill of the smoke hole and folds the worn blanket that's always sat on the bench near the fire. She doesn't take it. She just folds it. The fire burns down to a bed of red embers. The father stands near it, poker in hand, not stirring it, just standing. Then, with a breath you feel more than hear, he kneels and presses a flat stone lid over the hearth. Not to smother it entirely, just to dim it. Enough that, if someone returns soon, it could be coaxed back to life. They step outside, the air is different. Colder. The wind sharpens without apology. A modern white house waits on the next croft over. Perfectly square, perfectly clean, perfectly silent. The family walks toward it without looking back. You do. You can't help it. And there it is. The black house still standing. Rope-framed, soot-coloured, heavy with stories. Empty now, but not abandoned. It watches you watching it, and in the silence between you, something is exchanged. Not sorrow, not even goodbye, just recognition. This has happened before. It will happen again. You walk slowly back to the house one last time. You step inside. The warmth lingers, barely, but enough. You sit by the hearth and listen. There's no fire now, no voices, but the stones are still warm under your hand, not much. just a trace. And that's enough. You stand. You whisper something you don't quite understand to the soot-dark wall. Then you close the door gently behind you and walk into the wind. The house doesn't crumble, it doesn't groan, it just waits. Days pass, maybe weeks. The black house sits, stone-set and watchful, through drizzle and wind and the occasional blink of sun that barely counts. It isn't abandoned, just between lives. Empty, yes, but not forgotten. Not exactly. You walk past it often now, staying in the newer house with the family who once called it home, and though the concrete walls don't creak and the floors don't slope and there's hot water that comes out of a pipe without protest, it doesn't feel like an upgrade. It feels like exile with better plumbing. The family is adjusting. Sort of. The children are quieter. They keep drifting outside, lingering near the old place like moths drawn to a dying lantern. The grandmother is the only one who doesn't visit. She stares instead through the window of the White House toward the Black House, her gaze sharp and unwavering, as if daring it to fade, as if making sure it doesn't. One morning you find her sitting near the new hearth, electric, silent, glowing orange in a way that never changes. She's wrapped in a thick shawl, the same one she used to wear beside the peat fire, but it looks wrong now, like wearing morning clothes to a birthday party. "Do you miss it?" you ask gently. She doesn't answer right away. Then she says, "That house knew my first breath, and it will know my last if I have my way." You say nothing, because what could you say to that? Historical fact. After relocation schemes began, many older islanders refused to fully settle into the new homes. Some would sleep there, but eat and spend their days in the black houses until the structures became too unstable. Others moved back entirely, unofficially, returning to their hearths and resigning themselves to unimproved life. The comforts of modernity, they said, weren't worth the silence of plaster walls. You start slipping away in the afternoons back to the black house. Not because there's work to do, there isn't, but because something in you still feels unfinished. You open the door slowly, careful not to disturb whatever the house has settled into. It smells like stone and cold ash, and that deep, leafy damp that only lives in ancient walls. But there's no rot, no sadness, just stillness. You light a candle and place it on the hearthstone. It's small, the flame too clean, too tame, but for a moment it flickers just enough to throw shadows into the familiar corners. You sit, you wait, and the house begins to breathe again. Not all at once. It's subtle, a slow expansion of warmth, a shift in the way the smoke hole above frames the sky. The sound of the wind passing by becomes a whisper instead of a wail. You don't imagine this, you feel it. The black house may not be alive, but it's not just shelter. It never was. It's something older, something with its own rhythm, slower than yours, but constant. Fringe fact, in folklore it was said that a house could grow cold after being left, like a body without a soul, but it could also wake up again if tended properly. Lighting a fire, opening a window, singing softly into its corners, these small gestures were believed to invite the spirit of the house back home. So you speak to it, not loudly, not in full sentences, just murmured fragments, stories you remember, a joke one of the children told, a memory of the wedding, the laughter, the oatcake left on the hearth. And slowly, the house listens. Here's the debate. Is this animism, nostalgia, or just projection? Anthropologists argue that people often assign life to places because it comforts them, that homes become containers for emotion. But maybe that argument misses the point. Maybe the house is alive, not in a biological sense, but in the way a song or a memory is alive. Not with blood, but with meaning. You begin cleaning. Not a full restoration, just small things. Brushing out soot, straightening the rope where it sagged, wiping the hearthstone with a cloth dampened by salt water and moss. You hum as you work. A low, wordless tune you don't recognize until halfway through, when you realize it's the melody from the wedding night. The one played by the fiddle. Your voice cracks a little, but you keep humming. You find the girl's red string still tied to the nail. You leave it. Of course you do. When you tell the family what you're doing, they don't protest. They don't even seem surprised. The father just nods. We'll all be back in there someday, he says, one way or another. By the end of the week, the black house is still weathered, still empty, but it's no longer sleeping. You've stirred something, and now it waits. Not with sadness, not with urgency, just with patience. It knows how to wait. It's outlived storms and silence before. It will again. That night a storm brushes the island, light but loud. The White House shudders in the wind, its windows clatter, its heating hums loudly in protest. You lie awake, missing the creak of ropes, the groan of turf, missing the way the old house sounded like it was bracing with you, not just around you. So you slip out. You walk the short distance in the dark, no lantern, just memory. The black house is there, unmoved, unafraid. You step inside, shut the door, and sit on the stone bench. The wind presses against the walls but finds no weakness. You wrap yourself in a scratchy blanket left folded by the hearth. You rest your back against the soot-warmed stones, and the storm feels smaller here. Not because it is, but because the house shares it. Like it always has. It's the quiet tasks that bring the black house back to life, sweeping ash from corners where it collected like dusted grief, straightening the drying lines where wool used to hang in dense, tangled clumps, rewinding ropes so they lie flat and tight against the beams. You don't rebuild, you don't renovate, you tend. And as you do, the house begins to feel more itself again, less like a relic, more like a heartbeat. The grandmother visits first. She doesn't say much, just steps in, stands near the hearth with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, and breathes through her nose like she's tasting the air for memory. She walks one slow lap of the interior, brushing her fingers along the tops of the box beds, touching the low door frame with her knuckles. She stops by the niche in the wall where someone once stored their pipe and runs her thumb along the edge. Then without a word she sits, not on the bench with the cushion, on the floor back against the stone, legs tucked under her like folded laundry. She sits as if she never left. Later the children drift in, first one barefoot and chewing on a stalk of grass, then another, dragging a wool blanket behind him like a tail. Soon they're all there, playing in that odd hush children always adopt when they're somewhere holy but don't realise it. They pile into the box beds, poke around for treasure in the gaps between stones, pretend the fire is still lit and the pot still boiling. And for a moment, the house doesn't feel empty anymore, it feels paused. Historical fact. Many black houses stood empty for years after being vacated, but some families maintained them as secondary spaces, storing tools, drying fish, sheltering lambs. Others turned them into summer kitchens or kept the hearth lit during major holidays. It wasn't unusual to return for Hogmanay or Samhain, to light a small fire, tell a story, and let the old stones remember they were once home. You find yourself speaking to the house more often now. Not always out loud, but with your hands, polishing wood grain with oil from sea buckthorn berries, darning a long-forgotten bit of curtain that had been chewed by both wind and mouse. You whistle while you work. Not a tune you know, just something that wants to exist in the air. You begin writing the names on the stones outside, just in chalk, nothing permanent. The grave markers that had gone nameless for decades suddenly bloom with small scrawled letters: Mary, Callum, Isabel. You're not sure if the names are right. Some you learn from the children, who guess with unnerving confidence. Some you invent. But the names are offered with care, and the stones seem to accept them. Fringe fact. In certain Hebridean traditions, names weren't always carved into headstones. A name spoken aloud, regularly, was believed to be more enduring than one etched in stone. As long as someone remembered your story, you hadn't truly gone. One evening a peat fire is lit in the hearth. It's not official, no ceremony, just the father, kneeling on the stone, placing the bricks with a gentleness you've never seen in him before. He lights it the old way, dry moss, steel and flint, a patient kind of friction. It takes longer than he expects and no one helps. Everyone just watches. When the fire finally catches and the familiar smell of burning turf snakes into the room, you swear the walls pull in slightly, like lungs expanding after a long breath held too long. The smoke drifts upward through the thatch hole. The warmth settles over the stones like a returning blanket. No one speaks, because the black house is speaking now. The children gather around instinctively like sparks drawn back to flame. The grandmother hums something under her breath. The mother stirs a pot of barley and water just to keep her hands busy. You sit with your back to the door, watching the orange light flicker against soot-dark beams, and you feel the house slide back into its old skin. Here's your scholarly debate. When does a ruin stop being a home? Some argue that once a structure ceases to meet modern standards of habitability, it ceases to be a living house. Others argue that a house is defined not by plumbing or power, but by memory, by use, by story, by love. That a black house, even when cold, even when cracked, can remain alive if it is held. That night the family stays. Not officially, there are no beds made, no bags packed. But they don't leave when the sun drops. They don't return to the modern house. They stay, they sit, they sleep. Some curled by the fire, others in the box beds that once held generations. You wake in the early hours to the sound of someone stirring the embers. The glow paints the walls a soft, familiar red. The house creaks, not in pain, in contentment. And you realise this isn't a return. It's a rebalance. The White House stands, yes, full of plumbing and convenience. But the Black House, this old, smoky, weathered cave of stories, lives again. Not every night, not every storm, but often enough. You see it in the way the children disappear from chores and are found hiding behind the stone walls, pretending they've never left. You see it in the way the grandmother starts singing again, her voice low and cracked but steady. You see it in the fire which someone keeps lighting quietly without being told. And the Black House holds them, again, as it always did. It's near dusk when the storyteller arrives. No warning, no invitation. Just an old man with sea-glass eyes and a walking stick carved with more lines than your hands could trace in a lifetime. He's thin and tall and bowed slightly like a fishing rod mid-tug, and he smells faintly of smoke, salt, and wet wool. No one asks who he is. They just make room. That's how it goes in a Black House. Strangers aren't questioned. They're absorbed. He sits near the hearth like he belongs there, which you suspect he does. And when the fire is crackling steady and the wind is pressing just lightly on the turf roof, he clears his throat and begins to speak. No intro. No throat-clearing metaphors. Just, there once was a man who built a house with stones he stole from a graveyard. The room stills. Even the cow in the byre quiets. Because this is what the Black House has been waiting for. Not the warm fire, not the mended rope, not the sweep of a kind hand against soot. It's been waiting for the story. He tells it slowly, like dragging a net through thick kelp, about the man who thought the dead wouldn't mind if he borrowed what they no longer used, about how the wind started to whisper in unfamiliar voices, about how the hearth wouldn't stay lit, no matter how many times he struck flint, about how, one night, the stones themselves began to hum. The children huddle close, the adults lean in, even as they pretend they're not listening. You're certain some of them know this story already, but that's never the point. Historical fact. Storytelling wasn't just entertainment in Hebridean black houses, it was infrastructure. It held families together during long winters, preserved genealogy, passed on weather patterns, mapped the landscape and built emotional endurance. The Seonchai, traditional storytellers, were both historians and magicians. Their tales were half record, half ritual. He moves on, story to story, like stepping stones over a bog. A woman who married a selkie, a cat that could predict storms but only in riddles, a house that blinked once and was never seen again. With each tale, the Black House seems to sit up straighter, like a dog recognising an old whistle. The shadows lean in. The fire flares in quiet applause. Fringe fact. There are documented accounts of islanders who believed their black houses were listening. Not metaphorically, literally. Some elders would whisper warnings or truths only after dark when the house wasn't paying attention. Others would tell stories just loud enough for the walls to catch them, ensuring the memory didn't end with them. At some point the storyteller stops. Not because he's done, he'll never be done, but because the house is full. You feel it, saturated, like the air itself has thickened with words and ashen wonder. He leans back, satisfied. No applause, just silence. Then the grandmother, who hasn't moved in over an hour, says, "My mother told that story, the Selkie one, but in hers the man turned into a seal instead." The storyteller grins, all teeth and wind-worn gums. "Aye," he says, "that's how it goes. Truth doesn't have just one coat." There's your scholarly debate. Oral tradition isn't fixed. It morphs with each teller, each audience, each storm. Some say that makes it unreliable. Others say it makes it immortal. What is more alive than a story that can change and still stay true? The children are sleepy now, heads nodding, mouths twitching in half-formed dreams. One clutches a piece of driftwood from the storytelling bundle, a magic stick, they called it. You remember when it was a spoon, or a sword, or a fishing rod? In a black house, objects don't retire. They just shift roles. You help lay blankets in the box beds, one child per nook, each tucked like bread in a basket. The father lays another peat brick on the fire. The mother sings softly, Gaelic words so old they've lost their edges, turned into breath more than language. The walls absorb it all. Later, you and the storyteller sit outside under a sky bruised with stars. The wind has quieted, its hunger sated by the night's offerings. The black house behind you is still lit faintly from within, a warm eye in the darkness. The man smokes a pipe that smells like dried herbs and seaweed, and he watches the clouds roll low across the moon. "You kept it alive," he says without looking at you. You shake your head. "It was never dead." He chuckles, a sound like rope tightening. "No, but even old things need reminding they're loved." You sit in silence for a while, boots in the heather, back to the house. The land stretches out in every direction, soft and worn and humming faintly under the stars. You think about how many people have sat right here, right in this spot, listening, waiting, remembering. And you realise that the Black House isn't just a home or a ruin or a shelter. It's a kind of echo chamber, a place that doesn't trap stories, but gives them space to grow loud again. It's not about preservation, it's about permission, to speak, to feel, to remember. When you finally stand, your legs stiff and your chest heavy, the house behind you seems to glow just a little brighter. Not from the fire, but from all it now carries. Again. Tomorrow the family will go back to the White House. That's fine, it's warm, it works. But they'll return here too, on birthdays, on stormy nights, on days when grief needs a quieter place to breathe. And the Black House will wait, as it always has. Patient, stoic, stone-wrapped and rope-bound, alive. So now here you are, standing in the doorway of a house that has outlasted tempests, laughter, loss, and governments who tried to tidy away its stubborn soul. You run your hand along the edge of the old stone, still cool, still rough, still very much itself. You look back once more at the fire, low now, coals shimmering like distant stars in the dark belly of the hearth. The box beds are empty, blankets folded. The ropes above creak, not in warning but in rhythm. You exhale, and the house exhales with you. It doesn't need to be lived in every day to be alive. It doesn't need voices in its rafters to hold them. What it needs is memory, attention, the occasional hum of someone returning, not to possess it, but to listen, to tend, to honour. So tonight, as the wind curls gently around the stone corners and the salt air sneaks through the cracks, you let your mind drift. Back to the storm, the wedding, the feather on the grave, the girl's red string, the old woman's shawl, and the way the fire sounded when it cracked open the silence. Maybe this is what survival really looks like. Not just weathering the wind, but becoming a part of it. Not just keeping the walls standing, but teaching others how to read them. Not just telling the story, but knowing when to let the house tell it for you. So you step outside, you close the door softly behind you, and the Black House remains, unmoved, unburned, unbroken, waiting for the next voice and the next fire, the next night.